Have you ever felt the thrill of stepping onto a train at night? The kind of excitement that mixes with a little fear? My name is Joseph A., and I'm about to share with you a journey that will send shivers down your spine. It all started one dark evening when I hopped onto a rambling midnight train, thinking I was just going home. But what lay ahead was far from normal. As I settled into my seat, I noticed something strange. Everyone else on the train was quiet. Not a single sound. Their faces stared blankly ahead, as if they were stuck in a dream. I should have left right then, but curiosity pulled me deeper into the mystery. Little did I know, this trip would take me through eerie landscapes and memories long forgotten, to a destination that felt like a glimpse into the unknown. Join me on this spine-tingling ride. I want to know where you're listening from, so drop a comment. And if you like the story, hit that subscribe button to stay with me. Are you ready to dive into the shadows? Hold tight, because I'm about to take you on a journey where every click of the wheels sends chills through your spine and every dark corner hides a new fear. This is not just a story, it's an adventure that might just keep you up at night. Now, let's dive into the story. I boarded the train at the old station, a slight drizzle tapping at the windows like tiny fingers trying to get in. The platform was mostly empty, with only a few dim lights flickering overhead. I tucked my scarf tighter around my neck and hurried inside. The door slid shut behind me with a loud thud, and I immediately felt that something was off. I glanced around the carriage. It was filled with passengers, yet it felt so eerily quiet. Not a single person spoke, and their faces were pale, like statues carved from stone. They all sat with their heads down, lost in a world that felt nothing like my own. I found a seat by the window, letting the soft glow of the moonlight filter through the glass. Outside, shadows danced under the trees as the train chugged along. But where were we heading? The train picked up speed, rattling the inside. I looked outside and saw the familiar landscapes of home fading into something strange and twisted. The trees looked like twisted hands reaching for the sky, their branches stretching far too wide, scratching against the air. An unsettling chill ran down my spine as I noticed the other passengers still hadn't moved. Were they sleeping? Or was there something more sinister at play? The air grew colder, and the lights inside the carriage flickered as if trying to warn me. I decided it was time to leave, feeling a wave of unease. I stood up, my heart racing, and walked towards the door, my palms sweaty. With each step, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me, probing into my very thoughts. But as I reached for the door, it wouldn't budge. It was locked tight, as if mocking my desperation. My heart pounded as the train continued its relentless journey, and I was forced to sit back down. I tried to calm myself, taking deep breaths while glancing around at the passengers again. One man, his eyes vacant and hollow, lifted his gaze briefly to me. His mouth moved, as if he were trying to whisper something, but no sound came out. I shuddered, the fear growing as I realized he might not be able to speak or even feel anything at all. The train suddenly lurched, throwing me against the window. I grasped the edge of the seat tightly, looking outside to catch my breath. The landscape had completely changed. Instead of the trees and hills I'd known, there was a vast expanse of darkness, with swirling mists rising up as if the very ground were alive. I could see shapes moving within the fog, something that looked like shadows creeping closer. Panic stirred within me. I glanced around again, hoping for some sign of life, but all I saw were those lifeless faces staring ahead. I felt trapped like a bird in a cage, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, without warning, one of the passengers, a woman who looked like she had been crying for days, turned her head toward me. Her eyes were wild and sad, her lips trembling. "Don't look away," she whispered, her voice barely reaching me. Before I could respond, the train screeched to a halt, sending me lurching forward. I caught myself before hitting the floor, but the sudden stop felt like a jolt of electricity. The lights fluctuated, dimming and brightening, and I gazed out the window in a daze. We were surrounded by a thick fog. A pale figure floated through the mist, too translucent to be real, but my eyes couldn't look away. It was beckoning, a slow, deliberate motion that called to something deep inside me. An icy hand pressed against my heart, urging me to follow it beyond the safety of the train. But all I could think was how wrong it felt. The woman's words echoed in my mind. I felt as if the other passengers were fading into the walls, their silhouettes blurring, becoming one with the shadows. I looked back at the mysterious figure outside, torn between fear and an almost magnetic pull toward it. Just then, the lights flickered violently, drowning the carriage in darkness for a heartbeat. In that instant, I felt a rush of cold air wash over me, and a whisper, chilling and sinister, brushed against my ear. "You're not meant to leave." I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat, and in that moment, it became clear. I was on a train to a destination far beyond where I began. I shot up from my seat, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I banged my fists against the door that had once seemed locked so firmly. "Let me off!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. But no one responded. The passengers sat there, arms limp, as though my cries were nothing more than soft whispers carried off by the chilling wind outside. I slammed my shoulder against the door, pushing with all my might, but it held firm like a giant's grip. I stumbled back, feeling dizzy. The train lurched again, sliding forward into darkness, and I felt the ground beneath us tremble. I couldn't shake the vision of the pale figure, its eyes hollow, yet filled with a yearning I couldn't understand. I returned to my seat, heart racing wildly, my mind racing with fear and dread. The train plunged deeper into the fog, and time began to lose meaning. Shadows flitted past the windows, resembling creatures I couldn't quite see. They were close, too close. My breath came quicker as I realized what I was in. The spirit of the train itself was alive, and it seemed as if it fed off the fear of its passengers. I turned to the man with the hollow eyes, desperate for answers. "What is this place?" I begged, but he merely stared at me, vacant and empty. It was as if he hadn't heard me at all. But the woman with the tear-stained cheeks caught my eye again, and she leaned in, whispering urgently, "You must not close your eyes. Not for one single second." Nerves frayed, I held on to her words, fighting the encroaching darkness that tugged at my consciousness. Suddenly, the train jolted violently. A deep rumble rattled the windows, shaking my very bones. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. In the silence that followed, I could hear my heart thudding in my chest, a rhythm that felt out of time with the world around me. Panic erupted among the passengers, a chorus of gasps and cries. But when the lights returned, I was alone in my compartment. The absence of bodies felt heavier than the darkness itself. Where did everyone go? I whispered to myself, dread pooling in my stomach. That's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure, blurred and shimmering, began to coalesce out of the fog that seeped through the cracks of the train. It hovered, slowly revealing a face that sent icy darts of fear into my heart. The pale figure smiled, but it was a ghastly grin that twisted its features into something monstrous. Have you ever wondered what happens when you take a late-night train? Is it a simple ride, or can it take you somewhere unexpected? Join me on the midnight train, where every turn of the wheels brings us deeper into mystery and fear. I want you to feel every heartbeat, every breath, and every chill as we explore this eerie journey together. Imagine boarding a train filled with strange passengers who don't make a sound, surrounded by landscapes that twist and change in the most unsettling ways. As I share this spine-tingling tale, I hope you'll sit tight and keep your lights on. Feel free to comment below and let me know where you're listening from, because your stories matter too. Let's dive into the unknown and see where the midnight train takes us. The train lurched forward, its movements jerky and strange. I stepped inside, feeling a chill in the air as I took my seat. The dim light flickered overhead, casting shadows that wobbled on the walls of the compartment. Something felt off right from the start. As I looked around, I noticed that all the other passengers were sitting entirely still, not even a whisper escaping their lips. I tried to speak to the person next to me, a man with hollow eyes and a thin smile, but he just stared straight ahead as if I weren't there. The silence was thick, pressing down on me. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. I glanced out the window, hoping to see something familiar, but all I saw was a blur of darkness. When I pressed the button to open the doors and step off, nothing happened. The train kept moving, and the soft rumble of the tracks echoed around us. Panic began to bubble inside me. Why couldn't I get off? What was happening? Each passing minute felt like an eternity as I watched the landscape shift. Trees turned into twisted shapes, and the darkness outside grew deeper, almost alive. Suddenly, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement. A figure appeared at the far end of the carriage. It was a woman, her long, flowing hair sweeping across her shoulders as she walked. But her face was pale, almost transparent, and her eyes were wide with fear. I stood up, my heart racing. "What's going on?" I shouted, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing loudly against the lonely train car. Curiosity pulled me to follow her, and I stumbled after her into a dimly lit corridor. The walls looked like they were breathing, pulsing with a life of their own. I felt like I was walking through a dream, a bad one. Each door I passed was either locked or slightly ajar, as if hiding whatever lay beyond. A sense of dread filled the air, making every hair on my body stand on end. Then I heard a soft sound like whispering coming from one of the rooms. The voices were not clear, but they beckoned me closer. I hesitated, my heart thundering in my chest, but something inside compelled me to push the door open. What I saw made my stomach turn. Inside, I found a room filled with mirrors, each showing a different version of reality. In one mirror, I saw the train still gliding through unending darkness. In another, I saw the man who had been sitting next to me, but he was now grinning, his mouth too wide to be real. I shuddered and backed away, but the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like angry bees. I stumbled back into the corridor, desperate to escape the noise. As I continued down the train, the dim lighting flickered even more, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned, only to find the woman again, this time closer, her face twisted in a silent scream. It felt as if the air thickened with despair. I shifted my gaze and saw that the train windows had transformed into dark, gaping mouths, stretching wide as if yearning to consume everything around them. "Help me," the woman mouthed, but no sound came out. I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. Suddenly, the train lurched violently, and the lights flickered out completely. I was swallowed by darkness. Every sound amplified. My own breathing, the thump of my heart, the whispering voices that now seemed closer than ever. It was a symphony of fear, and I was trapped in the middle of it. As the train continued to speed onward, I stumbled toward the rear of the car, hoping to find an escape. I heard the man's laughter behind me, a chilling sound that slithered into my ears. I couldn't escape him. He was everywhere. I felt the walls closing in, the air growing heavier with each breath I took. Shadows danced around me, and I could feel the weight of their presence as I pressed against the door, my palms sweaty and trembling. I yanked the door open and stepped outside, only to find that I was not on the train anymore, but standing at the edge of an endless chasm. The ground swayed beneath my feet, and I fought to keep my balance. A cold wind whipped through, carrying echoing voices that called my name, urging me to come closer. I looked behind me. The train had vanished, leaving me standing on a narrow path suspended above a void. Glancing down, I saw shadows writhing, faces morphing, mouths moving in silent screams, and hands reaching out as if trying to grab hold of something, anything. A sharp sense of dread gripped me. "Don't look down!" I shouted to myself, yet my eyes betrayed me. I felt pulled by an unseen force, drawing me closer to the edge. "Stop!" I cried out in panic. Just then, I caught sight of the woman again, her figure flickering at the edge of the chasm. She looked terrified, but this time, she reached out with her hand, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. I took a few cautious steps, my heart pounding in rhythm with the terror in the air. "You have to help me," she implored, but the words were muffled, lost in the shadows swirling around us. I wanted to reach out, but an overwhelming sense of danger held me back. Each step toward her felt like a journey into a nightmare. The ground shifted beneath my feet, and the edges of the chasm cracked, sending plumes of darkness swirling upward. I could sense the shadows moving, encroaching around me, eager to pull me down into their depths. I turned to run, back toward where the train had been, but the path was gone, replaced by nothingness. "Don't leave me," the woman cried, her voice echoing through the void. Panic surged inside me. What was happening to her? I didn't want to abandon her, but how could I save myself? A wave of guilt crashed over me. Suddenly, the whispers became a deafening roar, drowning out everything else. The darkness pressed closer, the air vibrating with frustration. I realized then that whatever force had taken the train was not just a means of transport. It was alive, feeding on our fears, our silent screams blending into a cacophony that echoed through the chasm. I had to make a choice: stay and help the woman or escape this nightmare. I took a deep breath, the chill of the air biting at my lungs. "I won't leave you," I shouted, my voice rising above the din. I stumbled back, fighting the pull toward the darkness long enough to grapple with my fear. But I knew I couldn't just abandon her to the shadows. I would confront whatever haunted this midnight ride. With a rush of determination, I stepped back toward the edge, forcing myself to look directly into her eyes. "I'm coming, just hold on." I took a step closer, but the swirling darkness surged forward, grasping at my legs, pulling me down. I could feel their icy fingers trailing along my skin, trying to drag me back into the depths. "Help me," she screamed, her face morphing with desperation. I couldn't let go. I forced myself to take another step. My heart raced, and the ground trembled ominously. I reached my hand out toward hers. Inches separated us. The shadows hissed as I felt the warmth of her fingers brush against my own. It was electrifying, and through the coldness, I felt a surge of hope. But just then, the ground shattered beneath us. I felt a sharp pull as I plunged into darkness, my heart racing, breath catching in my throat. I fell, but I felt her grip remain, a lifeline tethering me to whatever reality was left. The world spiraled around us, and I screamed into the void, but something inside me wanted to let go and just disappear. As we fell deeper, the whispers turned softer, like a lullaby pulling me toward an eerie sleep. I fought to stay awake, to stay with her. "We can make it," I cried, my voice echoing, desperately battling against the comforting pull of oblivion. The darkness enveloped us completely, and I felt my heart racing. I couldn't tell which way was up, which way was down. I squeezed her hand tightly, hoping she could feel my determination. "I won't leave you," I shouted again, louder this time, drowning out the whispers urging me to rest. But the shadows grew thicker, wrapping around us as heavy as a shroud. I had entered a place where time bent and reality shattered, where fear twisted into something tangible. I looked toward her, and she was slipping. I could see it in her eyes, the despair creeping back in. "Stay with me," I yelled, pulling her closer as the darkness threatened to consume us both. Through sheer force of will, I felt energy coursing through my veins, pushing back against the encroaching void. I remembered the train, the silence, the horrifying stillness of the passengers. This fear couldn't win. I began to summon all my courage, feeling warmth blooming in my chest as I shouted against the shadows. "We can fight this!" I felt a sudden pull, as if the shadow had reeled back at my defiance. The darkness tightened around us again, but I pushed harder, feeling a surge of light emanate from within. I called out, "You don't control us." My voice filled the chasm, shaking its very foundation. I felt us being lifted, as if the shadows were throwing their hands up, recoiling from my determination. Then, flickers of light began to dance around us, illuminating the dark. The woman's face brightened, her eyes shining with renewed hope. With a final scream of defiance, I surged forward. We broke through the darkness, tumbling into a blinding light, landing softly on solid ground. I looked around, bewildered, taking in the scene. The train was now a distant memory, the landscape shifting into vibrant colors, life bustling around us, as if we had stepped out of a nightmare. But a panic still tinged the air. I could sense the shadows lurking at the edges, whispering, their hunger not entirely sated. I looked at the woman beside me. Her expression was a mix of relief and fear. We weren't safe yet, but we'd escaped the worst, at least for now. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I held her hand tightly, anchoring us both in this new reality. "I don't know," I replied, still shaken. But I knew we had to keep moving, to face whatever lies ahead. The midnight train had left a mark on us, and our journey was just beginning. Even though we had escaped the darkness, I could feel its shadow still lurking just out of sight. The landscape around us shimmered with the promise of adventure, but I also sensed an undercurrent of danger, a reminder that we were not out of the woods yet. With each step we took, I could feel the weight of the shadows still haunting us, waiting for their chance to strike again. We walked forward, hand in hand, ready to face whatever awaited us in this strange new world beyond the midnight train. As we took our first tentative steps away from the terrifying darkness of the train, I felt a weight lift slightly, but a gnawing sense of dread lingered in my gut. The landscape around us was vibrant, bursting with colors unfamiliar and strange, yet there was an unsettling distortion to it all. The trees towered above like twisted giants, their bark a sickly shade of purple that looked like it was weeping. Leaves fluttered in a breeze that had no right to be there, whispering secrets only the shadows knew. I glanced at the woman beside me, her face pale in the otherworldly light that surrounded us. "Do you think it's over?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound brave. She shook her head slowly, eyes wide with a fear I understood all too well. "I don't think we're done yet," she replied, her gaze shifting towards a path that wound through the trees. Compelled by an urge I couldn't ignore, I started down the path. With each step, the ground squished beneath my feet like something alive and breathing. Shadows darted around us, flitting between the trees. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every broken twig sounded like footsteps stalking us from the shadows. As we continued deeper into the strange realm, the sun began to slip away, drowning the world around us in elongated shadows. An oppressive darkness closed in, pulling at the edges of the vibrant colors. I dreaded what lay ahead, but we pressed on, guided by nothing but curiosity and fear. Suddenly, we stumbled upon a clearing overrun with tall, dark grass swaying in the wind. At the center stood a large stone structure, a crumbling tower that looked like it belonged in another time, another world. Its surface was coated with a thick layer of moss, intertwining with the stones like tiny fingers clutching the past. The air around it felt colder, as if the tower were sucking the warmth from the very ground we stood upon. As we approached, the girl beside me gasped. "What was that?" she whispered, pointing toward a large fissure at the base of the tower. My heart raced as I peered closely, the darkness yawning wide like an open mouth, inviting us to look into the abyss. Cautiously, I leaned closer to the edge, an instinct pulling me to peer inside. I saw only a void, an inky blackness that seemed to shift and pulse. But that wasn't what horrified me. From the depths of that darkness, I could hear faint whispers, a chorus of voices speaking in frantic tones. They sounded like lost souls, crying out for help, their pleas echoing in a language I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. I stumbled back, shaking my head to chase away the haunting echoes. "We shouldn't go near it," I warned, stepping away. But as soon as I turned back toward her, a shiver ran down my spine. In the distance, figures began to emerge from the trees. Dark shapes loomed, gliding toward us effortlessly. Their movements were unnatural, jerking like marionettes on frayed strings. Panic surged through me as I frantically looked for an escape, but there was none. The figures stepped into the fading light, revealing themselves clearly. Their faces were vacant, eyeless stares that seemed to pierce right through me, bodies contorted in grotesque ways. They were dressed in ragged clothes that fluttered like tattered flags. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to run, but found myself frozen, my body gripped by fear. One of the figures inched closer, arms outstretched as if pleading for something I couldn't understand. I glanced back at the woman, and she looked just as frightened. Our eyes locked for one brief moment, and that's when I felt it, the cold, creeping sensation that crawled up my spine as if someone was watching us from right behind. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. It became clear to me that the darkness was alive, watching and waiting. The whispers grew louder. They were all around us now, swirling in a storm of sound and confusion. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but my voice caught in my throat as if the shadows had wrapped around my words, binding them tight. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the grass violently, and I felt myself stumble back. The shadows began to shift, the figures blurring at the edges. I grabbed the woman's hand tight and started to retreat back toward the trees. The figures seemed to sense our fear, their eyes glowing with a hunger that twisted my stomach. "Run!" I shouted, pulling her along with me. We barreled back into the trees, branches clawing at our arms as we pushed through the underbrush, desperate to escape the horrors behind us. The whispers morphed into angry shouts, echoing our names in mocking tones. They seemed to be feeding off our fear, growing louder and shriller with every step we took. We stumbled deeper into the woods, breaths racing, hearts pounding like drums in a frantic battle. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath us, and we found ourselves tumbling down a hill, landing in a damp thicket at the bottom. Gasping for air, I looked around, struggling to gather my bearings. The air was thick with a strange mist that rolled steadily toward us, wrapping around my legs like a predator coiling for the kill. I felt my skin prickle as I realized this was no ordinary fog. It was filled with whispers that reverberated in my mind. The shadows were drawing nearer, closing in again as if summoned by the thick, humid air. "That way!" I pointed toward a faint light flickering in the distance, barely visible through the haze. We had to move. We could not allow the darkness to swallow us whole. I grasped her hand, and together we raced through the mist, pushing our way back toward the light. As we drew closer, the light intensified, illuminating an odd structure ahead, a wooden cabin, half hidden in the trees. Its walls were bent and warped, resembling a creature cowering away from the darkness that surrounded it. The door hung slightly ajar, swaying back and forth invitingly. "Hurry!" I urged, pulling the woman inside, just as the shadows loomed close once more. The instant we crossed the threshold, the air felt different, charged, electric. It felt like a barrier against the darkness, though it almost hummed with unease. Inside, the cabin smelled musty, filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. The oppressive weight of the outside shadows was replaced by an eerie silence, but I could still hear the whispers faintly seeping through the cracks in the walls. "What is this place?" she gasped, looking around wide-eyed. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to calm my racing heart. "But we can't stay out there." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as I turned my gaze to the large window. Outside, the shadows loomed, swirling and undulating as if alive, probing the edges of this strange sanctuary. Their whispered tones grew fervent, rising in desperation for the darkness to reclaim us. I knew we couldn't stay still, but where could we go? I scanned the room, trying to find some way to block the entrance. I spotted a large, rickety table piled high with old books. "We can use this!" I exclaimed, rushing toward it. Together, we pushed the table against the door, the movement sending up clouds of dust that hung thick in the air. The whispers swelled into a cacophony, mixing with the howling wind outside. I could feel the shadows clawing at the cabin, their frustration palpable. Deep dread clawed at my insides. Yet we had momentarily barricaded ourselves from whatever waited beyond. "What if they get in?" she asked, her voice quivering with fear. "I don't know," I admitted, heart racing, "but we have to find something to protect ourselves." As I looked around, my eyes fell on an old metal fireplace poker in the corner, rusted but sturdy. I picked it up, gripping it tightly. "Do you think that will help?" she asked, fear etched into her features. "I don't know," I replied truthfully, "but at least we can try." The shadows pressed against the wooden walls, and the whispers turned to screams, rising and crashing against the cabin like waves on a stormy shore, threatening to break through. Just as dread pooled in my stomach, a loud bang reverberated through the cabin. The door shuddered violently against the table, as if something huge was trying to force its way inside. I looked at her, both of us knowing we couldn't surrender to whatever darkness threatened to engulf us. "Get ready," I said, holding the poker firmly as another loud crash rattled the door and echoed through the room. The door creaked ominously, the table groaning under the pressure as I held my breath. I had no idea what awaited us on the other side, but I felt an unmistakable heaviness, the very air thickening with dread, charged with an energy that felt alive. The shadows finally stopped, their weight pressing down as if deciding our fate. I backed away from the door, inching towards the window, searching for a glimmer of hope. Outside, the mist churned, revealing glimpses of distorted faces hidden within its depths, eyes hollow and desperate, mouths contorted into twisted mockeries of human expression. They were watching us, waiting, and I could feel the shadows' hunger essence lapping at my feet, willing me to join them. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching sound at the door like fingernails dragging against the wood. I exchanged terrified glances with her, and realized with dawning horror that even though we had barricaded ourselves, we were still not safe. As the scratching grew louder, a voice, familiar yet distorted, slithered through. "Help us, join us," it crooned, laced with sinister sweetness. I pressed my palms against my ears, urging myself to block out the noise, but it seeped in regardless, worming its way into my thoughts. "Don't you want to be free?" "No!" I shouted, gripping the poker tighter, my knuckles white. "You're lying." The shadows outside seemed to rush against the window, pressing thicker and thicker against the glass until I feared it would shatter. With a suddenness that took my breath away, a shadow rushed forward, crashing against the door. The table groaned under the force, and I could see splinters beginning to form along the edges. I shot a glance at the window. Outside, the faces twisted and contorted in rage, their mouths forming grotesque shapes, calling my name, each whisper filling my soul with an icy grip. "We can't hold forever," she cried, panic rising in her voice. "What do we do?" I needed a plan. My eyes darted around the cabin, searching for anything that could help us. Then I noticed a set of stairs leading to a darkened loft above. "We have to go up," I decided. "Maybe we can find a way out from there." I grabbed her arm, and we rushed toward the staircase, just as the door buckled under another attack. The shadows screeched, furious at our escape, and I could feel their anger swirling around us like a storm. We climbed quickly, the wood creaking beneath our weight. The loft was filled with dust and old crates, but had a small window that led in a sliver of light. "Look here," I pointed, and we stumbled toward it. The light seemed to offer a moment of safety, a small respite from the darkness outside. But the shadows above us began to press down harder, growing restless. I could hear them whispering, their voices melding into one anguished cry, pleading for something I couldn't understand. They wanted in, they wanted us, and I knew we didn't have long before they broke through. I tugged the window open, but it creaked in resistance. Panic surged within me as I pulled harder, my fingers slipping against the slick wood. "Come on," I urged, desperately trying to force it open. "We have to get out." Her hands joined mine, and together we heaved with all our strength until the window finally gave way, swinging open with a rush. We both turned, hearts racing, ready to leap into the unknown. Outside, the ground dropped away into a dark abyss, The only thing below us was a pale mist swirling restlessly. Without time for deliberation, we had to make our choice. Just as we readied ourselves to jump, I heard one last haunting whisper, curling around my thoughts like smoke. "You can't escape." It froze me in place, and my heart sank. The shadows had grown bolder, their shapes merging and shifting into grotesque figures that lunged toward us, mouths wide in a silent scream. With terror jangling my nerves, I grabbed the woman's hand tightly. "We can't listen to them," I yelled at the voices, desperation fueling my resolve. "We jump on 3. Her eyes widened, uncertainty flickering like candlelight, but I could feel the shadows claw. I felt the shadows clawing at my mind, their whispers creeping deeper into my thoughts. I needed to break free from their hold. I squeezed her hand tighter, the warmth of her palm anchoring me in that suffocating moment. "Okay," I breathed, looking in her frightened eyes. "On 3. 1, 2. The sound of pounding on the door rushed to meet us, almost drowning out my own voice. 3. We leapt together, hearts pounding in sync as the ground beneath gave way, pulling us into the unknown. Air rushed past us as we fell through the swirling fog, anticipation mixed with sheer terror. My stomach lurched. I could barely think as we tumbled deeper into darkness. I clung to her, our fingers intertwined, the only solace in this chaotic plunge. Suddenly, we hit the ground. Not hard as I expected, but soft, as if we'd landed on a mass of feathers. I drew in a sharp breath, and it felt like the air itself was alive with electricity. I opened my eyes, expecting despair, but was met with an eerie stillness. It felt like time had stopped. Around us was a vast expanse, shrouded in a silvery mist that glimmered in the dim light. The atmosphere felt suffocating, eerily beautiful, yet full of dread. I turned to the woman beside me, and her expression mirrored my own confusion. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I stood slowly, scanning our surroundings. There were distant shapes, shadowy forms moving through the mist just beyond my sight. The whispers had faded to a low murmur, a haunting melody that seemed to wrap around me. I felt a chill run down my spine, the kind that signals you are not alone. "We have to keep moving," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. She nodded, her resolve matching mine even in the face of terror. We moved together, stepping cautiously through the thick fog, trying to make sense of this surreal place. As we walked, I noticed strange plants arching from the ground. Their petals were wide and dark, dripping a thick substance that glistened like oil. I hesitated, reaching out to touch one, but the moment my fingers grazed the surface, the plant recoiled as if in pain. I jerked my hand back, breathing heavily as the surrounding mist thickened, swirling around us like a living thing. "Did you see that?" I asked, glancing at her, fear twisting in my stomach. She nodded slowly, still trying to absorb everything. "It's like they're alive." Her voice trailed off, and I realized the truth. Everything around us was a part of this strange world, and we were intruders. Before I could respond, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned just in time to see a figure darting through the mist, a dark silhouette that vanished almost immediately. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my heart racing. "Over there!" My mind raced, uncertainty mixing with fear as the figure seemed to tease us, slipping away just before we could get a good look. We pressed forward, adrenaline pushing us through the obscured landscape. The whispers around us grew louder again, morphing into a chaotic chorus of laughter and cries that echoed with each step. It felt as if the world itself was mocking our plight. The mist clung to our legs, pulling on us, daring us to turn back. Then I saw it, a faint flickering light in the distance, barely breaking through the heavy fog. Hope ignited inside me. "Look!" I exclaimed, pointing toward it. "There! We need to get there!" My heart surged, carrying a glimmer of hope amid the encroaching darkness. But as we approached, that light flickered erratically, casting strange shadows that danced like specters, warping the shapes of the trees. We moved cautiously toward it, the light growing brighter, as we closed the gap. My feet felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. The whispers escalated to a fever pitch, their tone growing frantic, almost angry. "We shouldn't be here," I muttered, but I couldn't change direction. Something pulled me forward. Finally, we stumbled into what appeared to be a clearing. In the center stood an ancient well, its stones glimmering under the eerie light. The air around was charged, filled with an almost electric sensation. An unsettling urge compelled me to peer into its depths. I stepped forward, gazing down into the yawning blackness. The bottom seemed impossibly far away, shrouded in shadows. I could still hear the whispers, now more frantic, almost pleading. "Don't look, don't listen," they warned, and yet I felt mesmerized by the sight. "What's down there?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and curiosity. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I just shook my head, entranced by the swirling darkness. As I leaned in closer, I felt a cold breeze rise from the depths, wrapping around me like icy fingers. I could almost make out shapes moving just below the surface. They twisted and writhed, beckoning me to join them. Images flooded my mind, flashes of despair, faces I'd never seen but felt connected to somehow. I felt myself teetering on the edge. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me back violently. "Don't!" she shouted, panic lacing her voice. I blinked, and the spell broke, sending shockwaves through my body. I stepped back, breathing heavily, heart racing as I glanced at her. I stammered, trying to shake off the moment's grip. "They want you to look," she said, backing away from the well, her eyes darting nervously. "They're trying to trick us." The whispers outside grew even louder, their urgency palpable. The air pressed heavily around us, and I at once realized whatever dwelled within that well was hungry for something more. "With what's happening outside, we can't stay here," I said urgently, looking around for any other way out. "We have to find another path." As I turned my back to the well, the whispers turned into an uproar, a cacophony of rage and despair, resonating deep in my bones. We stepped away from the well, its edge fading into mist behind us, but I felt its pull lingering. In my mind, the landscape around us seemed to shift, the trees bending slightly, almost as if aware of our presence. I could feel eyes watching us from the shadows, waiting for the moment when our guards would lower. We pressed on, moving in the opposite direction of the well, but I was acutely aware that darkness still encroached. We hurried through the clearing, anxiety twisting my gut as I could almost feel the shadows breathing down my neck. I glanced back once, then twice, fearing the mist would rise up with every step. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a low growl. I turned my head sharply to the left. "Did you hear that?" I whispered urgently. She nodded, fear radiating from her. It was a guttural sound, full of malice and hunger, echoing through the trees, growing closer. My heart thumped wildly as we quickened our pace. The mist began to swirl more violently, wrapping around our ankles like tendrils, trying to trip us as we ran. I could feel the shadows shifting, growing thicker, moving faster as if they hunted us, driven by a primal instinct. "We need to find shelter," I shouted over the rising chaos. My mind raced, scanning the landscape for any sign of safety. Then, through the swirling fog, I caught sight of another building, a crumbling cabin with completely darkened windows, shadowy and menacing. I hesitated, but desperation surged through me. "Over there!" I pointed, sprinting toward it, dragging her behind me. As we dashed forward, I thought I heard the whispers move to something akin to laughter, as if they reveled in our panic. We reached the cabin and burst through the door. As it slammed shut behind us, I leaned against it, my heart hammering in my chest. The inside was chokingly dark, shadows clinging to the corners as though refusing to let go. The air smelled of rot and damp earth, twisting my stomach. "Is it safe?" she asked nervously. I squinted into the darkness, trying to gather my bearings. "I don't know," I admitted, moving cautiously forward. I fumbled in the darkness, seeking a light source, but everything felt wrong about this place. Suddenly, I noticed something glowing faintly in the corner, a dusty lantern lying precariously atop a rickety table. I lunged for it, my fingers trembling as I lit the wick. The flame flickered to life, casting an orange glow, weak yet illuminating. Shadows danced on the walls, recoiling momentarily from the light. Then, without warning, I heard that low growl again, this time louder and closer. The door vibrated under a heavy force, rattling against the frame. I turned to her, fear plastered on her face. "It's coming," I whispered, my own voice filled with dread. The lantern flickered, casting ghostly images around the room as we backed further inside. The growl transformed into scratching, sharp nails gouging the wood outside. My mind raced. The shadows were closing in again, and I was painfully aware that the cabin may not protect us for long. "Find something to barricade the door," I urged, moving toward the window to peek outside. But as I did, the mist pressed against the glass. Faces trapped within, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. I backed away, heart pounding louder than the world outside. "Please no," she gasped. I could see terror reflected in her eyes, and it mirrored my own. There had to be a way out. "Quick, the furniture!" I shouted, rushing toward the nearby chairs and tables. We pushed them against the door, straining against the growing pressure as the growling intensified, the shadows at work outside our fragile sanctuary. The door shuddered violently, splinters flying as whatever was lurking outside pressed harder. I could feel the weight of dread pressing down on my chest. The shadows didn't just want in. They wanted us to succumb to the darkness. "Hold on!" I yelled, pushing against the table with all my strength as the door rattled ominously. I glanced again at the window, praying we'd find a way to escape, praying we wouldn't succumb to whatever waited for us beyond this fragile barrier. As if sensing our plight, a series of knocks reverberated through the cabin, each one shaking us to the core. "Join us," a voice hissed, echoing like a memory long forgotten. The shadows whispered sweetly as if they were offering us a gift, taunting us with the idea of letting go. "No, we won't give in," I screamed, feeling anger rise within me. "We will fight." I joined her at the door, pushing with every ounce of strength as the next wave of pressure hit. The growling intensified, morphing into an unbearable cacophony of voices begging, howling, and laughing. I felt my resolve waver, the weight of despair pushing against me like an insurmountable force. But just as I felt myself slipping away, I remembered the warmth of her hand in mine. "We can resist," I shouted, and she nodded, determination flickering in her hazel eyes. We weren't destined for this fate, not while we had each other. We just needed to hold on a little longer. The growling suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. My heart raced as the shadows paused, holding their breath. The room seemed to hold an energy of its own, as if it could sense our defiance. Then, without warning, the door blasted open, and the shadows poured in like a dark tide, cloaking us in their malevolence. The lantern flickered furiously, its light flickering against the encroaching darkness. I could see figures emerging from the mist, tall, shadowy forms with elongated limbs stretching toward us. Their faces were a blur of rage, agony, and hunger. "We have to go," I yelled, grabbing her hand once again, pulling her toward the back of the cabin where another doorway stood ajar. The figures did not hesitate. They rushed forward, howling in a cacophony that pierced through the space, echoing the darkness that threatened to swallow us. We dashed through the doorway, slamming it shut behind us, hearts racing as the shadows screamed in fury, frustrated by our escape. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of decay as we found ourselves in a narrow passage that led down into further gloom. "Where are we?" she panted, glancing around nervously. My eyes scanned our surroundings, noting the dirt-strewn path lined with crumbling walls. "I have no idea, but we need to keep moving," I replied, pushing forward with a sense of urgency. The whispers had returned, swelling around us like a wave, promising solace and sweet release as we trudged deeper into the dark. The passage twisted and turned, the walls closing in as if. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers becoming a friction of sound, a terrible symphony of haunting laughter and chilling cries. I could feel my heart slamming against my ribs as we hurried down the passage, the walls feeling as if they were closing in, suffocating us. Each step raised the hairs on my neck, a primal instinct warning me of unseen dangers lurking just beyond my reach. The air grew colder, wrapping around us like a shroud, and with that chill came an unsettling presence, almost tangible. My thoughts raced, tangled with fear and uncertainty, but I pushed myself to lead the way. The passage twisted like a serpent, winding deeper into darkness, pulling us farther from any glimpse of safety. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely breaking through the growing noise. I strained my ears, hearing a distinct rhythmic thumping alongside the cries, a low sound that seemed to mimic a heartbeat, alternating with the whispers that beckoned us to turn back. Indecision clawed at my mind, but I couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. "Just keep moving," I told her, trying to maintain a calm tone despite the rising dread. The passage opened into an even darker chamber, and my stomach dropped. The light from the lantern struggled against the thickness of the shadows, illuminating only enough of the space to reveal horror. Crumbled stones and remnants of broken furniture littered the floor, as if people had fled in terror from some unseen horror. A faint glimmer caught my eye, and as I moved closer, I discovered a multitude of symbols carved into the walls, twisted shapes and indecipherable runes filled with a dark energy. They seemed to writhe and shift in the lantern's light, saturating the air with a heavy weight. There was a palpable sense of foreboding, telling me these were not just mere markings but remnants of something far more sinister. "What is this place?" she said, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the wall, and I could see the goosebumps rise on her skin. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "But we need to get out." Just then, the rhythmic thumping escalated, and it dawned on me that it wasn't just sound, it was coming closer. Panic surged as I turned, scanning the darkness, feeling the request of the shadows pulling at me. Something was coming, something that thrummed with malice, like a predator closing in on its helpless prey. "We can't stay here," I urged, grabbing her hand again. We dashed back into the passage, moving further into the unknown. But as I ran, I suddenly stumbled over what felt like something alive, a mass writhing beneath my feet. I barely caught myself, the lantern swinging wildly, the light playing shadows across the walls like erratic ghosts. "What was that?" she gasped, her fear palpable. I turned to look, my breath catching in my throat. Emerging from the shadows were long, sinuous shapes, slithering on the ground, glistening in the lantern's light like black snakes. "We need to go," I shouted, yanking her onward. The thumping grew louder, a relentless drum echoing against the walls. I felt the temperature drop even more, and an unearthly howl reverberated from somewhere ahead. It twisted and curled around us, suffocating us. Adrenaline surged. I pushed forward, gripping her hand tightly, my mind racing with images of horrors that could be waiting just beyond the next bend. As we sprinted further into the darkness, the passage opened back up, leading to a vast cavern lit by an eerie, phosphorescent glow. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, illuminating twisted stalactites that dripped slowly like agonized tears from a stony ceiling. The ground underfoot squelched as I stepped forward, the sensation almost nauseating, like I was walking over something alive. "Look," she pointed ahead, and I followed her gaze to see what appeared to be a pool of water in the center of the cavern, glowing faintly. It reflected the ceiling above like a mirror, and for a brief moment, I felt a tug of something familiar, a desperate hope that this was a way out. But then I saw it, figures standing at the edge of the pool, their forms blurred and indistinct. They seemed to peer into the water, their faces twisted with agonizing expressions. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as a realization sank in. They were trapped, forever gazing into the depths below. A wave of horror washed over me. But before I could respond, one of them turned towards us, eyes gleaming with a hollow hunger. "Help us," it whispered, extending a trembling hand in our direction. My blood ran cold as I locked eyes with the specter, something within me screaming to run. "No, we can't help them," I shouted, grabbing her wrist and pulling her back. But she was immobilized, eyes fixed to the figure, a mixture of fear and sympathy lighting her face. "They're suffering," she said softly, almost entranced by their plight. "They need us." "No." I tugged harder, feeling a surge of panic. "They're luring you in. That's what the shadows want." Agonized howls echoed around us, and the other figures turned, their faces now twisted masks of fury and despair. They shifted closer, drawn by my resistance, angry that we dared to defy them. The pool bubbled violently, and the water began to rise, spilling over the edges like ink spilling from a tipped bottle. "Run!" I screamed, dragging her away as the shadows hissed, their whispers morphing into a disjointed roar. We turned and raced back through the cave, the echoes of tormented screams ringing in our ears. Every step felt like a fight against an unseen force, the weight of the darkness pressing in on us, trying to ensnare us in its treacherous grasp. As we reached the passage, I could feel the temperature dropping even further, breathing becoming labored as the shadows converged behind us, screeching with rage. My lungs burned, and rhythmically, like an unholy heartbeat, the growling continued, desperate and relentless. We made it back to the narrow section of the passage, but dark tendrils of shadow clung to the edges, whispering our fears, telling us to turn back. Desperation surged within me, an instinct to survive, and I pressed forward. The walls throbbed with a pulse, the whispers rising into a chaotic crescendo as I could feel the eyes of the shadows watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. "What if we get lost?" she gasped, her voice trembling with fear. "What if we don't find a way out?" I could hear the tremor in her voice, almost breaking under the weight of the terror surrounding us. "We will find a way," I shouted, hoping to instill any measure of strength. Just a little further, breaking through the darkness, a faint light poked through the shadows, hope igniting a flicker deep within my chest. I felt a rush of exhilaration and despair fight for dominance as we approached the source of light. Was it a way out, or merely another trap set by the darkness? As we emerged, we stepped into a vast chamber, a circle of light illuminating the area around us. A massive stone altar stood in the center, covered in what appeared to be faded sigils and exquisite carvings reminiscent of the runes from the walls. Around the altar, the light pulsed rhythmically, offering a harsh contrast to the inky shadows looming just beyond its reach. "Is this a way out?" she wondered aloud, but I felt a knot in my stomach. Something felt deeply wrong, and I knew the altar was not just an ancient relic. It felt alive, saturated with dark energy. Before I could respond, a chilling wind swept through the chamber, pulsing from the altar like a living entity. I could feel it tugging at my very core, unraveling my will and drawing me closer to that ominous structure. The whispers crescendoed into a maddening chorus echoing my innermost fears. The shadows swirled wildly around the chamber, darting in and out of the light, their voices a jarring cacophony of anger and sorrow. Suddenly, the altar emitted a blinding flash, illuminating the room and casting monstrous silhouettes on the walls, terrifying shapes of what seemed to be anguished spirits trapped in eternal torment. I stumbled back, disoriented by the fierce light, but I felt her grip tightening around my wrist, pulling me toward the altar as shadows encroached from every direction. "Stop!" I yelled, trying to hold her back, but the energy from the altar surged through me, enticing and overwhelming. "Don't let it pull you in." But it was too late. The atmosphere shifted like a tide, and the ground shook violently beneath us, throwing us off balance. The walls twisted and convulsed, shadows roaring and reaching out for us, drawn to the power of the altar. I felt something dark and terrible within me stir, a desire to succumb to whatever breath of promise the altar projected, a call to join them in their eternal suffering. No, I gasped, forcing every ounce of willpower into the moment. We won't let it take us. I drew on the strength of our bond, the unwavering connection that had brought us this far. Hold on to me. Fight it with everything you have. In that instant, I felt a surge of warmth flood my soul, burning fiercely against the cold grasp of the darkness. Together, we steeled ourselves against the overwhelming tide, creating a barrier of light with our combined will, pushing back against the night. But the shadows didn't relent. They lashed out, wrapping around us like chains, trying to pull us apart. I could hear their voices, taunting, offering sweet, deceptive comforts. Join us, and you will find peace. Their tempting words danced through the air, infiltrating my thoughts and igniting doubt. I clenched my jaw, focusing back on her. We've come too far. My voice was raw, filled with desperation. Remember why we're fighting? I searched her eyes, striving to ground both of us against the madness swelling around us. As the shadows shrieked, the altar pulsed with a frenzied light, overwhelming yet oddly alluring. I could feel the fabric of reality fraying at the edges, threatening to consume us in the dark. We aren't your pawns, I shouted, my voice fighting against the tide. With every ounce of strength, I pulled her closer, centering on the light emanating from our connection rather than succumbing to the shadows. The altar trembled, and the lights flickered dangerously as if wavering between flames and darkness. I felt the temperature drop further, an icy chill threatening to freeze us in place. Just as I thought it was all lost, the power surged back, the moment vibrating with potential and need. Let's finish this. Together, I yelled, determination rising in my throat, the shadows swirling in desperate rage as we took a step toward the altar. I felt a roar of energy igniting between us, a primal force that ignited our surroundings and sent tremors through the very ground beneath our feet. With a roar, the altar responded, focusing all its power into one last surge, blasting the shadows back into the depths. The darkness shrieked in fury, resisting our claim, but we stood firm, unbreakable in our resolve. As the confinement of shadows broke apart, tearing and unraveling like a dark veil, I could feel the world shifting again, the chamber fleeing into the distance as the light expanded. Space and time resumed, but the journey was not over. Gasping for breath, I locked eyes with her, feeling victory pulse through my veins, but the shadows were not finished. They receded momentarily, but promised a return, a lingering threat. For now, we'd escaped their clutches, but I sensed they were merely regrouping to reclaim what they had lost us. Whatever lies ahead, we face it together, I promised, the determination burning bright between us. We moved forward, hand in hand, ready to confront whatever darkness lay in wait, no matter the cost, knowing the true battle had just begun. The remnants of the shadows loomed behind us, their angry whispers growing fainter, but never quite disappearing. The brightness around us faded slightly, replaced by an unsettling darkness as we moved cautiously forward. Each step echoed in the stillness, and I could feel the air thickening, heavy like a shroud, pressing in on us from all sides. I don't like this place, she whispered, her voice trembling. I could barely respond, the unease crawling along my skin. The light we had pushed through flickered and dimmed, turning the walls into ghostly silhouettes of stone and shadow. As we walked, an uneven surface caught my attention. Looking down, I saw they were bones, piled beneath layers of dirt and decay. A chill ran through me at the thought of what had happened here, and I couldn't shake the image of countless lives snuffed out in this very place. I felt sick, but something compelled me to keep moving, a strange urge to discover what awaited us next. "Do you think we're close to getting out?" she asked, glancing nervously at the walls, where dark stains crawled upwards like creeping vines. My throat tightened, and I forced myself not to hesitate. I don't know. Just stay close. I needed to be the brave one, even as dread clawed at my insides. Suddenly, the path narrowed, the ground sloping downwards into an abyss that appeared to devour the light. The echoes of our footsteps faded, swallowed by the gloom. I resisted the urge to look back, convinced that if I did, I would see the shadows creeping up behind us, ready to seize the moment of weakness. "Do you hear something?" She sounded distant, and I strained to listen. At first, I heard only the dull thump of my heartbeat, but then came a soft melody, a lullaby that seemed to float through the air. It was haunting, beautiful yet terrifying, and it filled me with a sense of foreboding. "It's probably just our imaginations," I said, but deep down I was unsure. As we ventured deeper, the lullaby grew louder, wrapping around us like an embrace, lulling me into a trance. I shook my head, trying to push it away, but the melody whispered secret promises, urging us to move closer to its source. "Let's go back," she said, but I could see the conflict on her face, the pull of that terrible song weaving around her thoughts. "We can't," I replied, forcing myself to sound sure. "We have to find out what it is." Just then, the melody shifted, turning sour, simmering into a mournful wail. An icy shiver picked up the hairs on my arms. I glanced at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. What if it's a trap? I swallowed hard, realizing she might be right. But I felt drawn in, the darkness whispering that if we turned back, it would claim us for good. I pulled her forward, and we walked into an expansive cavern where the source of the song erupted in a terrifying display. Shadowy figures danced at the center, their movements frantic and jerky, as if they were puppets manipulated by some unseen force. Their forms shifted in and out of focus, illuminating fragments of twisted expressions frozen in time. Above them hung a massive chandelier, made of crystal that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. But instead of beauty, it emanated malice, dripping dark ichor onto the floor below. Black tendrils spiraled from the chandelier, reaching toward the figures and wrapping around them, tying them to the spot. "Run!" I shouted, but her feet were glued to the ground, entranced by the chaos before us. The figures' mouths moved in silent screams, the lullaby turning into a cacophony of anguish that reverberated through the cavern, shaking the walls and pushing against my sanity. I gripped her arm tightly, pulling her away just as one of the figures broke free from its dark bindings. It rushed toward us, its face a grotesque parody of a human, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck the light from the room. I felt a surge of terror wash over me. "Don't look!" I yelled, turning her face away. "Just follow me." We dashed to the side of the cavern, dodging chamber after chamber filled with dark memories, each corner revealing glimpses of the past. Twisted bodies frozen in their final moments, their faces twisted in horror. The air became thick with despair, weighing us down with each step we took. As we neared what looked like a stone doorway, I felt a pull, dark tendrils lashing at my ankles, trying to draw me back into the nightmare. They curled around the hem of my pants, while other unseen forces clawed at my mind, attempting to sink me into the depths of the shadows. "Hold on!" I shouted, desperately twisting away from the grasp. With a sudden burst of energy, I wrenched her forward, past the threshold of the doorway. We stumbled into an ancient passageway, adorned with engravings that glimmered in the dim light, marking a stark contrast against the darkness that sought to engulf us. This was different. The atmosphere was charged with something ancient and powerful. "What is this place?" she gasped, looking over her shoulder. The cries of the figures faded, but their haunting presence still lingered around us like a fog. "I don't know," I murmured, "but it feels safer." Yet even my own words felt hollow. The air here was heavy, filled with a sense of foreboding that made my skin crawl. Ahead, the passage spiraled downward into an even deeper pit, revealing a pool of water that shimmered eerily, reflecting light from cracks in the stone ceilings. The beauty of the pool was deceptive, and I felt it beckoning us, a siren's call hidden within its glimmering depths. It sprang to life as if aware of our presence, rippling ominously. I shivered, a chill running through me, and instinctively stepped in front of her, as if by doing so I could shield her from whatever darkness lurked beneath the surface. Suddenly, the lullaby returned, softer but more insistent, weaving around us, enticing and dangerous. "I can't help it," she whispered, drawn once more toward the water's edge. "It's so beautiful." "No!" I pulled her back, panic surging through me. The moment I laid hands on her, it changed. The water began to bubble, the surface transforming into a mirror, showing us twisted reflections of our worst fears. My heart raced as I threw her a desperate glance, understanding that the pool was siphoning our fears, using them to draw us in. "Look away! We can't let it trap us!" I screamed, forcing her to turn her head as I stood before the pool, ready to face whatever horror might break the surface. But just as I prepared to fight, the water surged, spilling over the edge and swallowing the ground around us, cascading with an insatiable rage. The shadows engulfed the room, and I felt a violent pull dragging me toward the depths, darkness clawing at my being. "Together!" I shouted, lurching towards her. "We jump!" With no time to second-guess, we leaped back, the weight of the shadows rising behind us, eager to reclaim what they had lost. We plunged into the pool, surrendering ourselves to the darkness, hearts racing with the thrill of uncertainty as we broke through the murky surface and into an unknown abyss. The water was frigid, 1,000 hands pulling at our bodies, freezing us mid-gesture. For a brief moment, I couldn't tell what was real, what was dream, as shadows flickered beneath us, promising curses and haunting our thoughts. I felt her grip slip away, and with a jolt, terror overtook me as I realized I was alone in the dark depths. "Where are you?" I shouted, panic cracking my voice. The whole world around me transformed in a chilling silence. I kicked against the water, fighting against the current, searching frantically, my heart racing faster than ever as I plunged deeper into the darkness. Then I heard it. A strangled scream erupted from above, echoing through the water like a jagged blade. It wasn't just a cry. It was a sound of pure, raw despair. "Help!" The whisper came from below, chilling and faint, reverberating in my ears, brushing against my soul like a soft caress. "Help me, please!" I felt myself drawn toward it, the shadows swirling around, whispering sweet promises of salvation. I wanted to reach out, but fear clenched around my lungs, pulling me into another haunting memory. I had to focus. I had to find her before it was too late. "Hold on!" I screamed, pushing the fear away as I swam back toward the surface, clawing against the dark current. Every stroke felt like a battle against unseen forces determined to drag me down, but I couldn't let them win. I couldn't abandon her to the horrors of that place. With one last push, I broke the surface, gasping for breath, searching frantically around me. The air above was different, lighter, but the shadows still loomed, waiting with their whispers. The chamber was empty. "Where are you?" I cried out, my voice mingling with the echo of my desperation. Each passing moment felt like an hour, dread creeping deeper into my mind. I floated, treading water, and a wave of helplessness washed over me. I had to find her. I couldn't leave her. Our connection was the only anchor I had in this abyss. Suddenly, a flicker of light caught my eye, a distant glimmer that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. My instincts took over, and I propelled myself towards it, hoping against hope that it would lead me back to her. As I swam closer, I felt the shadows stir once more, retreating ever so slightly, as if afraid of what lay at the light's edge. The light grew stronger, illuminating the surrounding darkness with a gentle glow. It felt inviting, warm even, contrasting the suffocating chill of the pool. I pushed through the water, closer and closer, determined to reach it, praying I wouldn't lose my chance. As I broke through the surface beneath the light, the scene shifted. I gasped, pulling myself out onto the cool stone floor, soaking wet but alive. And there she was, sitting against the stone, a look of profound relief washing over her face as I stumbled forward, collapsing by her side. I thought I lost you. I breathed, fighting against the crushing weight of all I had felt. Her eyes shimmered with anguish and relief, but just as quickly, something shifted in her expression, a shadow crossing over her features. "It whispered to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It promised freedom." The shadows crept back, whispering into her ears again, and I saw the struggle waging within her. "No, don't listen. It's a lie," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders, forcing her to meet my gaze. "We can't allow it to take us. We have to fight." Just then, a low rumble shook the cave, sending tremors through the ground. I felt something awaken, stirring in the darkness, angered by our defiance. It was the shadows rallying, consolidating their strength, and I could sense their fury, their desire to reclaim us. "They won't let us leave," she said softly, fear creeping into her voice alongside despair. "It's too late." I shook my head fiercely, battling against the doubt. "No, we've come too far to give in now." Suddenly, the light flickered ominously, and the shadows whispered louder, an angry chorus rising in intensity. Their shapes twisted and surged around us, seeking to invade our minds. Muffled cries echoed through the chamber, pulling at our thoughts, urging us to succumb. With a surge of determination, I pulled her close. "Together," I shouted, feeling the weight of darkness closing in, the shadows clawing at our minds and souls. But I wouldn't let them break us. I wouldn't let them take her away. As I concentrated on the light, I could feel its warmth in my chest, a fire igniting before it burst forth. It illuminated the entire chamber, pushing back against the shadows that writhed around us. The light grew brighter, pulsing with our united will, bolstered by love and defiance. The shadows recoiled, screeching in a deafening crescendo that reverberated around us. The darkness was angry, furious that we dared resist, but together, we became a beacon of hope. The shift in power was undeniable. Blee. The light consumed the shadows, engulfing them in brilliance, shredding their hold upon this place, unraveling their grasp bit by bit. I could see spirits swirling within, faces twisted in agony and rage, but they too seemed to relent, drawn into the light. The moment of victory felt close, but just as soon as the darkness seemed to fade, a massive form emerged from the depths, a monstrous silhouette rippling with shadows, howling with a voice like thunder. "You think you can escape?" it bellowed, its voice cutting through the darkness and vibrating through the chamber like a funeral dirge. I froze, the air around me thickening until breathing felt like a chore. The massive figure loomed, an amalgamation of nightmares, its form shifting and twisting unnaturally. Eyes like hollow pits glowered at us, furious and insatiable, filled with a malevolence that paralyzed my thoughts. "You believe you can resist me?" The voice boomed again, a laugh echoing in time with its words. Shadows writhed around it, forming tendrils that danced and stretched, brushing against the stones of the cavern with a sickening sound, like fingernails on glass. I could feel their icy breath swirling towards me, carrying whispers that promised salvation and power. I choked back my fear, focusing on the warmth radiating between us. "We don't belong to you," I shouted, surprising myself with the defiance that surged through me. But the creature's laughter only deepened, a rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of this cursed place. "I've claimed so many before you," it growled, its form darkening further, absorbing the shadows around it like fuel to a fire. They all begged for mercy, and in their desperation, they found only despair. "You think you are different?" I could see the fear flicker in her eyes as the creature pressed closer, its darkness threatening to swallow us whole. The shadows leaned in, curling around her as if they recognized her vulnerability. I could feel her fading resolve, and dread pooled in my stomach, rising like bile. "Don't listen," I screamed, stepping between her and the monstrosity. "You're stronger than this? We're stronger than it?" I could feel the surge of power within us fighting against the shadows, but it was like pouring water into a never-ending abyss. The creature's gaze turned on me, and for a moment, I felt utterly insignificant, just a flickering candle in a storm. It stretched its arm, dredged from the depths of nightmares, thin and elongated, fingers curling like talons. I could see the darkness swirling around its limbs, forming a vortex that beckoned me closer, luring me into its embrace. "Let me show you what true power feels like," it hissed, and in that moment I felt a pull, an intimacy that almost seduced me. Visions swirled around my mind, promises of strength and control washed over me. It was tempting. I could feel it teasing at the edges of my will, offering me everything I had ever wanted, the ability to dominate the darkness, to push back fear and pain. "No, fight it." I heard a voice, low and trembling. It was her. She was still there, but I could see she was wavering, torn between the alluring call of the creature and the hope igniting our path. "We can't let it take us." The shadows surged again, angry, writhing creatures, pulled into the wake of the monster. They swirled around, darkened tendrils reaching for me, gripping my ankles like cold chains. Every moment they pulled tighter, threatening to drag me back into the depths I had just escaped. With desperation, I summoned every ounce of strength I had. "Remember why we're here," I shouted against the din. "We're not here to give in, but to fight for what is rightfully ours." The darkness recoiled slightly, as if my words held a power of their own. I could see the flicker of her resolve rekindling, her eyes sparking with familiar determination. "Together," she said, inching closer, the bond between us reigniting a fire in the deep void of despair. "Yes, together," I shouted, and as we stood shoulder to shoulder, the light surged between us, brighter than before, filling the cavern with a warm glow. It snaked through the darkness, illuminating more faces trapped in the shadows, souls pleading, screaming for release. The creature howled in rage, its form shifting violently. "You think this light will save you?" It lurched forward, and the chilling presence of despair rushed, electricity crackling through the air. The shadows thickened around its shoulders, swirling like a tempest aiming to drown us in its despair. But we stood firm. "We will not let you win," I roared, channeling every ounce of strength, every memory of love and hope I had ever known. The light burst forth from our hands, cascading with an intensity that pushed back the tendrils, unearthing trapped souls from the creature's thrall. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash, and the cavern shook violently, stones crashing from above as if the world itself were tearing apart. The shadows screamed, voices blending into a haunting harmony of fear, and I could feel the power shifting, pulling away from the monster, returning to us. But just as victory began to feel tangible, the floor shook beneath my feet, and I lost my footing, slipping toward the edge of the abyss that had opened in the center of the room. I grabbed her arm, my heart racing as I struggled to pull myself back. But a tendril wound around my waist, yanking hard. "No!" I shouted, panic surging through me as I dug my nails into the cold stone, trying to anchor myself. I looked into her eyes, terror reflected back at me. "Don't let go!" But just as I thought I could pull myself back, the creature lunged again, snapping its jaws dangerously close to us. "I will feast on your fear," it roared, and another tendril shot out, grasping around her ankle, pulling her toward the dark void. "Help me," she cried, her voice cracking, and as I fought against the lash of shadows around me, a horrible realization dawned on me. The darkness was regaining its hold, pulling us apart, aiming to isolate us, break our bond. "Hold on! Fight it!" I screamed, straining against the overwhelming pull. She was so close, but the shadows were too powerful, pulling taut around her, weaving like serpents, ready to constrict her spirit. "Please, I can't hold on much longer." Her voice was slipping, and I felt despair clawing at my heart. The cavern was shaking violently, stone and debris falling as the creature writhed, using every ounce of darkness in its form to try and consume us completely. "Take my hand," I shouted, desperation igniting with a flash of anger within me. Fight! With every ounce of strength left, I reached for her, grasping it with all my might, and I focused on that light. The warmth surged between us once again, illuminating our very souls. Together, she echoed, and as our fingers touched, the shadows screamed in fury. The light erupted in a brilliant explosion, pushing the darkness back like a tidal wave. The cavern trembled, the very structure of it shattering as the light pulsed violently, expanding beyond the limits of our bond. The creature shrieked, a sound that clawed at my sanity, sending me into a whirlwind of spirals. But we didn't waver, and together we pushed through the light, facing the encroaching shadows, refusing to let them take us. Then, in a split second, everything changed. The ground beneath us cracked open, suctioning everything toward the abyss. The shadows howled as they struggled against the brightness, frantic to cling onto our souls. "Run!" she yelled, and I pulled her back as the ground fell away, shadows and light dancing in a dizzying invocation of chaos. We spun, disoriented, heart pounding, holding on to each other with every ounce of our strength. But even as we raced forward, I could feel the dread creeping back in. The creature howled, promising vengeance, its voice wrapping around me like a shroud. "Your light cannot defeat me," it screeched, and I could feel the ground trembling with its rage. "You will pay for defying the darkness. For every soul you freed, I will take two. You will join them." Cold washed over me again, like a hand squeezing my heart, threatening to suffocate us. I tightened my grip, snapping my focus onto the pool of light ahead, believing in the strength we had forged together. As I sprinted toward it, a surge of shadow lashed out before us, cold fingers gripping my shoulders, dragging me back, drawing me into a consuming pitch of despair. "Don't let go!" she screamed, and in that moment, the darkness pulsed, nearly ripping her from my grasp. "We can make it!" I shouted, my heart racing, fighting against the icy grip, relenting to the promise of freedom shimmering beyond. The echoes of the creature howled, furious and unrelenting, but I could feel our fire igniting stronger than ever. In one final act, we pushed through, calling upon everything we had, our memories, our hopes, our strength, until the shadows shattered against our brilliance, scattering across the cavern. The light enveloped us, a cocoon of warmth that swept through the darkness like wildfire. And then, as if pulled by an unseen force, we burst through the remnants of the void, finding ourselves in a world free from shadows, the air saturated with freedom. Breaths came rushing in, filling my lungs, and I pulled her close, feeling the warmth radiating between us as the darkness faded behind us, giving way to the brightness. We had escaped, but I felt the weight of the monster's promise lingering in the back of my mind. "Is it over?" she gasped, searching my face, and I nodded. But even as I said it, the memory of that creature's eyes haunted me, threatening to return, waiting in the shadows that lingered beyond the light. "I think so," I replied, but the darkness could not be so easily forgotten. We stood together, bathed in light, but the echo of the predator, the shadows would always be lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. I could feel it, somewhere deep in the recesses of my mind, plotting, thirsting for revenge. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. As the light surrounded us, I could feel my heart hammering against my chest, but there was no more warmth, only an eerie quiet. Shadows twisted at the edges of my vision, haunting shapes lingering like black smoke curling around me. The otherworldly brightness began to dim, and a sinking feeling replaced the initial relief. I glanced at her, and I could see she felt the change too, a shiver running down her spine. The air thickened with an unsettling tension, and although we had escaped the abyss, I sensed something lurked beneath the surface. I didn't know how long we would stay safe. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded slowly, eyes wide. It was a soft sound, almost like whispers intertwining, but the tone was sinister and heavy, a chorus of voices echoing from the shadows. They seemed to be calling out, crying in desperation, but all I could grasp was the overwhelming sensation of dread weaving through my body. "Let's keep moving," I said, squeezing her hand tightly, forcing myself to stay focused. We stepped forward, leaving the bright space behind us, deeper into the thick fog that enveloped everything. With each step, the atmosphere changed, morphing from eerie silence to a cacophony of voices, soft and sickly sweet, the words almost intelligible, slithering through my mind like cold fingers. "Come back, come play with us, let us show you," the whispers called, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. They seemed to echo from nowhere and everywhere, wrapping around us like an insidious embrace. I shook my head, willing myself not to listen, knowing these were the remnants of the creature's dark magic, trying to seduce me into a false sense of safety. I could feel the thrum of the breach deep inside me, reminding me of the threat that had pursued us. Suddenly, the shadows began to shift, swirling in a dance of malevolence, thickening around us as if alive and eager to consume whatever light remained. I turned sharply to her. "We have to keep moving. The darkness won't give up." We raced through the fog, but the whispers grew louder, transforming into a haunting choir that resonated within my brain. Their tones swirled, painful and seductive, weaving a web of fear that began to cloud my thoughts. It was tempting to stop, to listen, to succumb to the urge of allowing them to guide us, but I knew better. As the shadows danced closer, flickering like fireflies, I spotted shapes moving just beyond the veil, lurking in the corners of my vision. "Stay close!" I yelled, but my voice felt swallowed by the chilling mist. And then I saw them, spectral figures emerging from the gloom. They were half-formed, faces twisted in despair, mouths opening in silent screams. They drifted closer, their eyes hollow, like wells of emptiness. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. "They're lost," she stuttered, grasping my arm tightly. They were consumed by the darkness. I watched, horrified, as one of the figures reached out, long fingers stretching toward us, beckoning with a despairing urgency. "Join us! Be free," it whispered, the voice like gravel scraping against my soul, convincing and cold. My heart pounded in my chest, terror clawing at my insides. "Don't listen! Keep moving!" I shouted, tearing my gaze away from their haunted faces and pulling her forward. But as I turned, I heard a soft cry, resonating with my own longing for escape. The figures shifted behind us, shadows also filled with anguish, closing in around us. I felt the pull of something dark and powerful mixed with a sense of longing, a desire to trust what lay beyond. The whispers churned, wrapping around my mind like a noose, tempting me to reach out and join their eternal suffering. "No! Fight it!" I screamed, as if to shake off the despairing whispers that rippled through the air. I could feel her grip weakening, her resolve fading under the weight of the ghostly promises. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath our feet, causing us to stumble. The fog swirled violently as the shadows rushed forward, encroaching on our light, eager to engulf us entirely. In the center of the chaos, the creature emerged again, its monstrous silhouette beginning to take form from the shadows, eyes glowing with malice. "You can't escape me," it bellowed, its voice pounding like thunder, reverberating through the cavern as the shadows surged forward, pulsing with dark energy. "You will both join the wretched souls who long for rest. You will be another lost echo in my realm." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The darkness swirled closer, hungry tendrils reaching out, trying to latch onto us. "Run!" I urged, my heart racing as I fought against the rising tide of dread. We tore ourselves from the ghostly figures, sprinting against the ocean of shadows closing in, their whispers biting at our heels. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself was laced with despair. The cacophony of voices rose to a fever pitch, a maddening chorus tearing at our sanity. "Give and join us, find peace." They shouted in unison, their voices a sickly lullaby that threatened to drown out all rational thought. But we pushed on, sweat beating down my forehead, the creature's screams echoing behind us like a ghostly wind, a reminder that we were not safe yet. We dashed around bends, navigating through a labyrinth of darkness as the walls seemed to pulse, alive with hidden malice. Then, unexpectedly, the ground began to split apart, stones crumbling under my feet. Panic surged through me as I glanced back at her. "Jump!" I yelled, spotting a glimmer of light ahead. With a desperate leap, we crashed into what felt like solid ground. But before we could catch our breath, the shadows lunged after us, unrelenting. I could see their eyes, glowing malevolently as they clawed out of the fissures in the earth, stretching toward us with desperate hunger. "Run! It's right behind us!" I shouted, fear coating my voice as I propelled myself forward, dodging the shadows that lunged at our heels. With each step, I felt the ground shake more violently, ancient walls crumbling, sweeping stone and decay closer to us. "We can't let it trap us again," I gritted out, pushing her to the side as the ground cracked beneath us. "We're almost there." But just as our feet hit a stretch of uneven stone, we were plunged back into a darkness more profound than before. I could no longer see the light, only shadows that twisted into grotesque forms. The whispers swirled around us, voices mingling in a cacophony of despair, threatening to snare us into the abyss once again. "Don't look at them," I yelled, just as ghostly arms reached out to snatch at us, desperate to drag us down into their endless void. "No!" I cried, feeling the weight of dread crush down hard upon me, threatening to break my spirit. I couldn't let it take us. We had fought too hard to give in now. The shadows laughed, a chorus of twisted joy that reverberated through the darkness. And in that moment, a dark thought flickered in my mind. What if this was all in vain? What if we would become just like those specters, lost and yearning? I felt her hand slip slightly, the warmth fading, and panic flooded through me. "Hold on!" I screamed, spinning around as I struggled to keep her close. She was slip-sliding away, shadows curling around her legs, looking to drag her back down. I can't," she gasped, her voice breaking. "No, I won't let you go," I shouted, lunging forward. In a desperate act, I reached deep within, summoning the light that still flickered inside of me. A radiant glow erupted from my palms, pushing back the darkness like a spear against the abyss. The shadows shrieked, recoiling from the light that fought against the encroaching darkness. I turned, feeling her grip tighten again as the light expanded, illuminating the space around us, revealing the lost souls swirling in agony, a haunting parade of despair. "We can't let them pull us down," I cried, harnessing the energy that rose in me, fueling a desperate burst of absolute light that surged forward with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Together, we shouted, voices rising above the chaos, weaving our power as we stood resolute against the shadows clawing at our minds and bodies. The lights circled around us, engulfing the shadows, weakening their hold as they recoiled in fury, the whispers fading to terrified squeals. But I knew we weren't out of danger yet. Behind the fading cries, I could sense the creature's fury intensifying, its presence growing larger, more desperate. "I can feel it," I gasped, breathless, feeling the vibrations of power crackle around us, mixing with the darkness, forming a swirling chaos all around. "We have to escape before it comes after us." As we raced forward, I felt the shadows reach again, pulling at the edges of my consciousness, threatening to drown me in memories of fear and loss. It was like being torn between two worlds, each one promising either escape or eternal suffering. And then, as we pushed through the darkness, I saw a flicker of hope. Yet another glow ahead, more vivid than before, shimmering and alive. It pulsed with an urgency that beckoned us closer. "There!" I shouted, throwing all of my strength into one last sprint toward the light, pulling her with me. But as we neared the glow, I heard the creature's roar shake the very foundations of our escape, each note filled with rage and despair. "You will pay for this," it howled, reaching toward us with shadowy tendrils, eager for revenge. We dodged and dived, weaving through an onslaught of darkness that lashed out, seeking to ensnare us. "Almost there," I shouted, urging her as we sprinted forward, the light growing closer, promising safety. Desperation fueled our speed as shadows rushed toward us, grasping at our ankles, rising up to pull us back. The power within me surged, igniting a bright shield that sent echoes of light dancing across the walls. Flashes of warmth that contrasted sharply against the cold, merciless shadows. Just as I thought we would reach the safety of the light, the creature unleashed a final scream, a horrible, blood-curdling wail that pierced the air, shaking my very existence to its core. This is not over. Gripped by terror and adrenaline, I lunged forward, dragging her with me, and we burst into the light, feeling it engulf us like a protective cocoon. For a moment, we were suspended in brilliance, the darkness scattering behind us in a swirl of rage and shadows. But as the brilliance faded, I knew we weren't truly free. All around, the air shifted ominously, and lurking at the edge of my vision were remnants of shadows, swirling and coiling, waiting. The creature's promise echoed in my mind, a reminder that the darkness was still near, always watchful, ready for the moment our guard slipped. "Are we safe?" she asked, the fear evident in her voice as she looked around, unease creeping into her features. I shook my head, glancing into the dimness that surrounded us. "For now, but I feel it lurking. We have to keep moving, find a way to escape for good." With courage, we set forth again, aware that the shadows still trailed, eager to reclaim what they had lost. The air hung thick with despair, and the silence devoured every sound but our hurried breaths. The path twisted, filled with echoes of laughter and despair, the remnants of those who had succumbed to the darkness before us. Each footstep felt like a step deeper into an endless nightmare as we ventured further away from the fleeting light. I could feel the shadows shift, eyes poking through the obsidian darkness, tracking our every movement. It wasn't the end of the battle. It was just the beginning. As we pushed onward, I felt the whispers rise again, chilling and seductive. "Come back to us," they crooned, slithering through the air, urging me to turn back, to surrender to the void. But I fought against it, drawing strength from her presence by my side. I refused to let their voices break our resolve. We would turn the tide, reclaim our light, and disentangle ourselves from the grasp of shadows that hungered for our souls. But even as we pressed forward, I felt the creature's stare boring into my back, loosing shadows like arrows, ready to strike. How long could we survive before it finally reclaimed us? The tension grew as we continued walking deeper into the unknown, and the soft whispers of darkness only intensified. As the whispers swelled around us, I could feel a tightening in my chest, a sense of foreboding that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the shadows creeping ever closer. Each step we took felt heavier, like we were moving through thick mud. My heart raced, drowning out the echoes of their voices. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, observed by countless hidden eyes lurking in the dark. Suddenly, the floor below us shifted again, and I stumbled, almost falling to my knees. I grabbed her wrist, steadying myself as I felt the coldness of the stone beneath us. A low rumble resonated through the ground, and then I saw it, a crack forming, slithering like a serpent across the surface. I sensed dread wrapping around me like a cold blanket, and as it opened wider, a foul odor wafted up from the crevice, like decay and despair entwined. "What is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I didn't have the answer, but I knew we didn't have time to waste. I pulled her back, urging her to step away from the widening fissure. But as I took a step back, a chilling scream erupted from within, a cacophony of voices, all filled with agony and loss. It burrowed deep into my psyche, making my skin crawl and my heart nearly stopped. They're trapped, I realized, horrified at what I might see. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in closer, peering down into the darkness. The shadows writhed together, forming figures of once human beings, their faces twisted in anguish, mouths agape in silent screams. They reached for us, elongated fingers clawing through the gaps, begging for release from their eternal torment. They were like us, I murmured, fear clawing at my throat. I felt her shudder beside me, her eyes reflecting the terror emanating from the pit. But I knew we had to move. As the ground trembled again, I grabbed her hand and dragged her away, forcing myself to remain focused. We can't look back. We have to keep going. Yet the darkness surged forward, the shadows reaching out, curling around my legs like serpents, binding tighter with each step. I could swear I felt a chill creep into my skin, trying to whisper promises of safety in exchange for surrender. Join us, layered on top of each other, wrapping around my sense of self like a vice. Don't! I screamed, the sound echoing through the narrow passage, ricocheting against the ancient stones. I fought against the encroaching darkness, shaking my head violently, forcing myself to remember the light, the warmth. Ahead, the walls twisted inward, tightening like the jaws of a hungry beast. The air grew colder, thick enough to choke on, swirling with an unsettling mixture of hope and despair. My breaths quickened as I noticed a flicker of movement close by. Shapes danced in the corners of my vision, flitting just beyond reach, taunting us, whispering promises of salvation intermingled with threats of doom. Time felt distorted, each minute stretching and pulling like taffy. Stumbling onward, I found my resolve weakening, battling between the urge to flee and the pang of dread whispering in my ear. I thought I saw figures darting in and out of the shadows, flickering in the periphery, a cruel game they played, always just out of sight. Do you see that? I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper, unsure if I was imagining it or if the shadows were indeed shifting at the edges. She nodded, fear etched on her face, her breathing shaky as we pressed forward. Then, a shrill laughter burst forth, echoing around us, chilling my bones. It belonged to no one, but felt all too familiar, like the echoes of lost souls forever tethered to this dark place. They are coming for you, it taunted, a heavy and mocking tenor filling the air. Join the feast. I felt my blood run cold as the laughter echoed in my mind, swelling until I was forced to clamp my hands over my ears, desperate to block out the sounds. It clawed at my sanity, begging me to succumb, but I pushed through, feeling her beside me hold onto my arm tight, her grip steadying. I didn't look back even as the shadows surged around us, lashing out with bites of cold that left frost in their wake. Every time I heard the whispers grow louder, I would push harder to escape the grip of despair, but I could feel the panic building in my chest. The shadows were winning. The walls began to close in, narrowing the passage until each movement felt like an agonizing struggle. Every step forward seemed to be a step back, dragging me further into their abyss. I glanced at her, her face pale, fear painting her features as she tried to keep up with me. We need to find a way out, I said, my voice trembling, but she just shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes as shadows danced and flickered threateningly around us. I can't breathe, she gasped, collapsing slightly against the wall, her strength waning. I felt the weight of dread tighten within me, terror mixing with desperation. Just a little further, I urged, ready to pull her back to her feet. But as I did, a swirling mass of shadows gripped the wall, creeping toward her, reaching out to drag her into darkness. No! I shouted, lunging forward, but the more I struggled to reach her, the tighter the shadows gripped. The beast's laughter echoed again, cruel and mocking, filling the air with despair. You're too late, it mocked, the shadows twisting into grotesque forms, taunting me with memories of those who had failed before. With a surge of adrenaline, I grasped the full weight of her hand, holding on with desperate strength, and I pulled back with every ounce of willpower I could muster. The shadows writhed in agony, releasing her just enough for us to slip free momentarily. But I knew we weren't safe yet. I could feel the malevolence swirling again, a strength returning, almost desperate. "We have to go now," I yelled, dragging her onward, not daring to look back, fearing the sight of the shadows reclaiming her. We stumbled into a larger chamber, the darkness shifting and rolling like waves, pressing against us. The light from our time before felt like a distant memory as ghostly echoes swirled around, pulling at the edges of my sanity. I could barely make out the corners, but then I saw something, an ethereal glow shimmering faintly in the distance. "Look!" I cried, spotting the light through the haze. And for a moment, a sliver of hope pierced through the depths of despair. "We can make it to that." We rushed toward the glow, drawing nearer, but the shadows surged around us desperately, clawing at our heels, whispering promises of eternal freedom, tempting us to stay with them. "Fight them!" I shouted at her, fear flooding my voice. "Don't let them tempt you." It felt like we were running for our lives, but the shadows closed in rapidly, darkness licking at our heels. I could sense the creature's fury escalating behind us. The whispers erupted in a furious storm, drowned out by the beast's growl, its voice reverberating through every pore of my soul, growing ever nearer. "We're almost there," I urged, taking one last leap as I felt the darkness creeping up my legs, clawing, desperately trying to reach us. It felt like I was dragging a weight with every step, the shadows wrapping tighter, cold fingers trying to drown us in despair. "No, I won't let it take us," I screamed, and I was propelled forward, a surge of instinct driving me toward the light that beckoned like a lighthouse during a storm. The glow pulsated like a heartbeat, urging us on. Finally, with a burst of sheer will and energy, we crashed into the light just as the tendrils of darkness clawed at our backs. I felt an explosion of warmth envelop us, washing over my soul like a cleansing tide. But the darkness didn't disperse entirely. Its hunger remained palpable, clawing at the edges of our newfound safety. Shadows lingered just outside, their laughter echoing off the walls, taunting, waiting for another chance to consume us whole. With hope flickering like a candle in the storm, I clutched her hand tightly, realizing that we were not finished yet. We stood on the threshold between light and darkness, and the shadows watched, hungry for our next misstep, waiting for their moment to reclaim what they had lost. This can't be the end," I muttered, a sense of dread twisting in my gut. "We have to find a way to break free, to banish them for good." As I scanned the chamber, searching for a way to break their hold, I could feel the shadows rustle, shifting ominously. The creature's growl reverberated in my ears, promising vengeance, and I knew the battle wasn't over yet. We had escaped the darkness, but we had not defeated it. I could see the path split up ahead, one toward the light that flickered and glimmered, the other engulfed in murky shadows, inviting and treacherous. The decision weighed heavily. "Where do we go?" she whispered, glancing between the two paths, uncertainty etched across her face. I hesitated, feeling both paths pulling at me like a tide. The light, it feels safer. But I glanced back, feeling the darkness thrum with anticipation. The shadows might hide the answers we need. It felt like a gamble, a game of risk. But I took a deep breath, summoning the courage to choose. We follow the light. Maybe it will guide us to safety. It has to lead us somewhere away from this nightmare. With resolve, we stepped toward the shimmering path, but as we advanced, shadows crept closer, tendrils snaking out to bid us farewell. The chill set in, wrapping around my body like chains. "Stop!" a voice echoed from the darkness, a hiss of malice. It was the creature's presence, not yet willing to relinquish its claim. "You will not escape so easily." The plant-like shadows began shuffling closer, reaching, eager to take us back into the abyss. I could feel an icy grip seep into my bones, paralyzing for just a moment, pulling me back toward the pitch black. No, not again. I fought against the chill, feeling myself breaking under its weight. Desperation surged through me, reminding me of our shared journey, our will to survive. "We can't give in. Fight!" she screamed beside me, her voice strong and commanding, igniting a flicker of strength within me again. I felt the light pulse warmth around us, rekindling our fight against the looming shadows. As the darkness loomed closer, I gritted my teeth and summoned every ounce of power I could carry. "We will not be lost. You cannot have us," I shouted defiantly, as the whirlpool of shadows pulsed in detestable fury. The shadows shrieked, recoiling from our resolve, swirling into a chaotic storm, their screams melding into a singular howl of rage that shook the very fabric of this realm. But even as they retreated, I knew they wouldn't relent. The creature would find another way. It always did. "We have to keep moving," I reminded her, feeling the heaviness pressing in, urging us to succumb. "We can't let the darkness win," she called, her voice unwavering, even as I felt the shadows swirl around us like a tempest. Just then, in the relative clarity of the light, I saw it, a flickering doorway shimmering like a mirage, twisting in and out of focus. My heart raced even more as a wave of dread flooded through me. The doorway seemed to pulse, alive with otherworldly energy, almost as if it were calling our names, an escape from the overwhelming malevolence. "Look!" I gestured urgently, pointing toward the flickering light. "We have to reach that." With determination, we dashed forward, but the shadows were relentless, lashing out again. Just as we neared the door, a shadowy hand shot out, claws grazing my shoulder like ice, sending shockwaves of fear spiraling down my spine. "No, I won't let you take me," I yelled, shoving the shadow back with a surge of light, pushing against the darkness as hard as I could. The creature's voice echoed in my head, dark and foreboding. "You think you can escape? You are mine." The ground began to shake violently, and the shadows swirled faster, forming a vortex around us, threatening to pull us into its depth. Panic surged through me as I saw her falter, shadows latching onto her, trying to drag her down into the swirling mass. "Hold on!" I reached out, grabbing her hand as tightly as I could. We fought together, pushing against the tempest with everything we had left. "Don't let go! Don't let go!" I shouted again, gripping her hand tighter as the shadows writhed around us, desperately trying to separate us. The darkness surged, crashing around us like waves of a storm, pulling at my legs, tugging at my very being. I could feel cold fingers weaving through the air, trying to grasp us, to drag us back into the void where hope could not follow. The temperature plunged, and I shivered violently, the oppressive weight of despair pushing down on my shoulders. We stumbled forward, inching closer to the flickering light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Almost there," I panted, my chest tight with fear and determination. But the shadows were relentless. They grew thicker, darker, each tendril morphing into another horrific figure, their faces twisted in silent screams, hungry for our light and warmth. "Help us!" I screamed into the chaos, desperation clawing at my throat. But the swirling mass only cacophoned back a sinister laughter, echoing around us, the shadows reveling in our plight. I could hear whispers growing louder, their breath brushing against my ears like icy fingers, urging me to give in, to surrender to the darkness entwined with endless despair. "Fight it, please!" she cried beside me, her voice quavering yet fierce, reminding me of our purpose. I felt her grip slip momentarily in the struggle, and a surge of panic shot through me. I twisted, locking my eyes with hers, allowing our combined strength to push against the overwhelming force. We pressed on, the light drawing closer, illuminating the path ahead with a muted glow that felt like a beacon in the chaos. I could see shadows trying to block our way, materializing into grotesque shapes, creatures twisted like nightmares on the edge of my reality. They moved with an almost liquid grace, their empty eyes locked onto us with malevolence, seeking to destroy our hope at all costs. "No!" I yelled, feeling an ancient rage ignite within me. You will not take us." With a shout, I surged forward, breaking free of the grip of those phantom fingers, pulling her along with me. We stumbled together, our breaths ragged and hearts racing as we careened toward the light. The closer we got, the more I felt a sense of urgency, a primal instinct to escape the clutches of this malevolent darkness. But the shadows wouldn't let go easily. A low growl reverberated through the air, vibrating the very ground beneath us. I glanced back and saw the creature, an undulating mass of shadows and darkness, its form shifting and swirling, blending the features into a grotesque visage of rage and hunger. It opened its mouth wide, a gaping void filled with blackness, the shadows spilling out like smoke. Its roar resonated deep within my bones, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of sanity. "We have to hurry," I urged, my voice strained as I took in the horrific being closing in on us. The flicker of light wavered, almost as if responding to our fear, and still, we forced ourselves to run toward it. The shadows surged around us, tendrils, trying to wrap around our bodies and draw us back into the void. Each whisper articulated despair, calling out with names long forgotten, echoing tales of those lost within the depths. "Together," I urged, feeling her presence solidify next to me. An urgent energy ignited, and I held her hand as if it were a lifeline. We gathered every ounce of strength, every fragment of will, willing ourselves to push back against the infernal onslaught of darkness. Then, as if sensing our determination, the shadows mounted their final assault. They surged forward, a tide of darkness that felt alive, greedily reaching for us, claws of despair scratching at our skin, desperate to drag us into their embrace. In that moment, a realization hit me. I could feel the very essence of the shadows, the fear they fed on, the power that fortified their existence. They thrived on my doubt. "No more!" I cried aloud, summoning every ounce of strength. Bursting with adrenaline, I imagined a shield forming around us, pulling light from deep within, igniting the corners of my soul. "Stay with me," I shouted, feeling the energy surge through me, transforming into something vibrant, something powerful. Together, we channeled the light, shaping it into a force that blasted outward, illuminating the immediate darkness. With that burst, the shadows recoiled, shrieking in anger. The tendrils around us were scorched back, shriveling like dry leaves, and the creature howled, a sound of pure rage and agony that sent tremors through the cavern. We pushed onward, the flickering light ahead growing more substantial, a tangible brilliance that beckoned us with an urgency I could taste. We broke through the final barrier of the shadows, feeling the brightness envelop us. But as I stepped into the light, I felt a tug on my arm, dragging me back. Panic surged again, and I turned in horror to see the creature lunging forward, a mass of darkness intent on reclaiming its prize. "No, we have to go now," I yelled, pulling her with every ounce of strength and will I possessed. The luminous light rushed around us, casting the shadows away. Yet the creature's clutch was relentless, dragging at my core like an anchor pulling me below the waves. Just then, the light exploded at our backs, the warmth igniting our resolve. "Now!" I shouted, and with a final heave, we surged forward, the illumination blinding, swallowing us in its embrace. As the light enveloped us, the creature let out a final roar, an echo of defeat and anger that resonated in the depths, leaving an unsettling stillness in its wake. The world around us transformed. Shapes began to blur and resettle, shifting into something new. The shadow depths faded to a neutral gray, lifting the oppressive weight that had clung to us like a shroud. I blinked, trying to gather perspective in this new space. I turned to her, breathless with both fear and exhilaration. Did we make it? But even as I asked, I felt a tremor beneath our feet, a subtle movement as if the place we had landed was still alive. Panic trickled in again, and I glanced around, my heart thrumming. This was not the end. I could feel it. There were no walls, no confines, but an endless expanse of gray that felt both freeing and suffocating. "I don't know," she murmured, her voice scarcely above a whisper, her eyes wide. "What is this place?" Before I could answer, a shriek echoed, breaking the stillness, sharp, piercing, like glass shattering in the quiet of night. I flinched, my heart dropping into my stomach. The sound echoed again, getting louder, calling from the expanse, a summons unlike anything I had heard before. "We have to be careful," I cautioned, stepping closer to her, as shadows began to emerge from the gray, lurking at the edges, threatening to claw their way back into our lives. I thought I saw flickers of the creature, flitting among the shadows, waiting, lurking, eager to reclaim what it had lost. "I can't stay here," I whispered, despair coloring my resolve. "We must keep moving. Whatever that is, it's getting closer." As we ventured forward, a series of eerie visions flickered in my mind, images from another realm, haunting memories that felt all too real. I saw faces distorted with sorrow, eyes pleading even as they twisted in agony. I felt the weight of their suffering, an overwhelming burden wrapping around my heart like chains. "Are we in hell?" she asked, a tremor in her voice as she clung tightly to my hand. "I don't know," I replied, feeling the shadows creep too close for comfort. "But we can't stop. If we stop, we might lose everything." The hollering intensified, a maddening chorus echoing through the emptiness. With each step I took, it felt as though the shadows reached closer, looking for an opportunity to reclaim us. A sudden wind picked up, howling through the gray expanse, pushing against us like a force, urging us to turn back. It battered against my skin, sending chills down my spine as I felt the very essence of despair wash over me. "Run!" I yelled, feeling panic seize my heart as I hastened my steps, the haunting cries haunting my ears, drawing forth memories I wished to forget. I glanced over my shoulder, horrified to see indistinct figures emerging from the shadows, their faces frozen in expressions of torment that seemed to merge and blur with the darkness surrounding us. "Please!" I couldn't help but plead, urging them to stay back, even while I knew it wasn't possible. They were lost, trapped in this wretched space, just as we were. With each hurried step, I felt the ground shift beneath me, warping and twisting. The shrieks grew louder, more insistent, drowning out my thoughts and feeding the oppressive atmosphere. I could feel their emotions pressing in on me, anguish and fear blanketing me like a suffocating shroud. As the figures advanced, threatening to pull us back into the depths of despair, I kept my eyes locked on nothing but the flickering point of light that appeared just ahead. The taunting cries coiled around me like a noose, tightening with every moment I hesitated. "We're almost there," I shouted, my voice hoarse now, as I focused entirely on the distance, sheer determination pushing me forward. But with each step, the haunting figures began to retaliate, shadows reaching out with grasping fingers, desperately trying to hold on to us, to drag us back. "No!" I yelled, feeling a pang of terror surge through me as I felt their fingers brush against my skin. The cold seeped under my coat, frigid tendrils spiraling around my ankles, tugging me down towards the darkness again. "Keep running," she urged, her voice cutting through the cacophony of whispers and screams. I could see the resolve in her eyes, a fire ignited that pushed us both onward. With a surge of energy born from desperation, I gave one last surge forward, pulling her with me, feeling the shadows dissipate in our wake. I felt a crack forming in the air around us, a path opening that glimmered with the warmth of hope. "It's right there," I roared, charging towards the light, refusing to look back even as the darkness hissed at our heels. The figures wailed, their cries mixing with the wind as the darkness surged behind us. But with every step into the light, the warmth grew, swallowing the chill that clung to my very essence. In that final moment, I took a deep breath, focusing on the light ahead, and pushed forward, determined to leave the shadows and their tortured echoes behind. But just before stepping into the glow, a phantom tendril shot past me, striking my shoulder. I staggered, pain lancing through my body. I fell into the light, this time screaming as the shadows clawed at me, their power reaching out one last time, longing to reclaim their prey. But then everything erupted around us, illuminating the darkness, fusing light and shadow into a chaotic storm bursting with energy. I could feel the shadows boiling, dissolving around us, and the strange light pulled at the edges of reality, enveloping us in a tempest of colors I had never seen before. It was bright, blinding, yet exhilarating, a fierce light that promised freedom from the dark. "Hold on!" I yelled to her, my heart racing with a mix of fear and hope, ready to brave whatever lay ahead. And just like that, we spun into the abyss, flinging ourselves across dimensions, the light consuming everything with its warmth as the shadows howled behind us, echoing our escape, a promise that this fight was far from over. As the colors around us began to swirl, I felt a sense of weightlessness, like being caught in a maelstrom of emotions. The warmth of the light clung to my skin, yet shadows lurked at the edges of my vision, threatening to grasp hold of my thoughts. Sudden clarity struck, pulling me from the desolation, and I found myself standing at the edge of a vast, barren landscape, the sunlight stark and gray overhead. It felt eerily calm, a grotesque contrast to the chaos we had just escaped. The ground beneath my feet was cracked and dry, resembling a parched wasteland that stretched endlessly in all directions. "Where are we?" I whispered, but my voice felt small, swallowed by the silence enveloping this desolate realm. Beside me, she trembled slightly, her gaze darting about as her eyes reflected the surreal, dreamlike quality of the place. I could feel unease creeping back into my bones, gnawing at the edges of my mind like the growing shadows that had chased us here. In the distance, I could see shapes moving, shrouded in the haze of the midday sun, glimmering like mirages dancing on the horizon. "We need to go," she urged urgently, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly would awaken something in the empty expanse around us. I nodded, acutely aware that the shadows had followed us, lurking just beyond sight, waiting for a moment of weakness. As we began to walk, the ground crunched beneath our feet, the sound echoing too loudly in the stillness. With every step, I felt the atmosphere grow heavier. Something was watching us, a presence lurking just beyond the edges of what I could see. The silhouettes in the distance began to sharpen, revealing figures hunched and twisted, their forms grotesque and misshapen. They were not quite human, yet not entirely alien either, caught in the horrifying limbo between the two. Their skin looked like wax left in the sun too long, melting and pooling in unnatural ways. "Do you see that?" I murmured, the sight sending deadened fear coursing through my veins. "Yeah," she replied, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't get too close." But the creatures had already turned their attention toward us, their heads tilting at odd angles as they surveyed us with wide, empty eyes, void of any emotion, devoid of life. A chilling realization struck me. They were waiting, hungry for our fear. I took a step back, but hesitation only fed their curiosity. They began to shuffle forward, moving in a disjointed way that unnerved me. Their mouths opened in silent screams, twisting in ghastly smiles as if mocking our terror. "Run!" I shouted, gripping her hand tightly as we turned to dash in the opposite direction, heart pounding in my chest like a frantic drum. As we ran, the ground trembled beneath us, the air thickening with dread. The sun began to flicker ominously, shadows stretching longer, coiling around us like snakes seeking their prey. I could hear the figures behind us, their strange, disjointed movements echoing in the silence, growing closer as the dark tendrils spread like wildfire. I pushed myself to run faster, breathless panic clawing at my throat as I dared another glance over my shoulder. The figures were gaining ground, their contorted forms weaving through the darkness, horrid expressions fixed on our backs. "Faster!" I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins as I felt the unmistakable reach of shadowy hands brush against my legs. It felt like ice, cold and biting, awakening every instinct to survive. The light we had fought so hard for was becoming distant, a mere speck of hope as the darkness clawed its way back into our reality. "Keep pushing," she cried out beside me, her breath quickening as the figures lunged forward, outstretched arms reaching desperately to pull us into the depths of despair. With a primal roar, I surged ahead, my heart racing as I dodged the shadows grasping for us. But suddenly, the ground beneath us began to break apart, cracks snaking across the earth, and with a deafening roar, a chasm opened at our feet. My heart dropped as I felt the pull of the abyss threatening to swallow me whole. Without thinking, I grabbed her wrist, yanking her back as we both stumbled, narrowly avoiding being consumed by the darkness that surged and roared below us. But in that instant, I could feel my strength begin to waver. The shadows swirled, entangling my legs, clamoring to drag me down. "No!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the emptiness, fighting against the weight dragging me down into the unknown. Her eyes were wide with fear, mirroring my panic, and I could see in her face the reflection of every shadow, every nightmare I had ever faced. The monsters had returned, their whispers weaving a tapestry of dread that engulfed us both. "Hold on," she screamed, struggling against the shadows that licked at her ankles, trying to collect both of us into their grasp. Desperately, I envisioned the light we had once found, the warmth that had given us strength. I concentrated hard, feeling that flicker at the center of my chest. "Not today," I shouted, channeling everything I had into that frail spark, letting it explode outward in a blinding flash of energy. The air crackled with electricity, and the shadows shrieked in anguish as light pierced through the dark. I felt power surge through me, a wave crashing against the darkness, pushing it back and growing brighter with each breath. The darkness recoiled, screeches filling my ears as the ground steadied, the chasm narrowing as if the very earth had come alive, unwilling to let darkness claim more victims. "This way," I called to her, pulling her along, instinctively darting toward a glimmer of warmth in the distance. The overwhelming power that now radiated from me kept the shadows at bay, their figures thrashing and twisting in fury as we ran. The flash of light anticipated our arrival, wrapping around us with arms of warmth, rejuvenating as it pulled the darkness toward its edges. We dashed forward, feeling the atmosphere shift, the oppressive weight of the darkness beginning to lift. Flashes of the past flashed before my eyes. Horrific images clashed with memories of light and strength. The creatures screeched, their shadows stretching behind us, struggling against the energy that sought to confine them. But just as I thought we were free, a haunting sensation swept through the air, sharpening my instincts. Glancing back, I saw one figure, larger and more grotesque than the others, emerging from the darkness, its twisted form glowing with a sickly light. Its mouth widened abysmally, revealing teeth like shattered glass, ready to consume everything in its path. "No, no, no!" I hissed, panic flooding my veins. This creature felt different, like the embody, meant of despair itself, alive and thrumming with insatiable hunger. As it approached, I could see woven into its mass the faces of those who had been lost to the shadows, twisted in an eternal grimace of suffering. "Run!" she screamed, terror etched across her features. We sprinted toward the light, feeling the pulsating energy surrounding us glow brighter with every step we took. But the creature surged forward, its limbs extending impossibly long, clawing the ground as it lunged at us. I could hear its ragged breath, sharp as the wind, menacingly close behind me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to escape, a primal urge to survive emanating from my core. A sudden roar of fury erupted from the creature, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. I felt the shock waves ripple through the air, threatening to knock me off balance. Desperately, I pushed forward, channeling the last vestiges of light that burned within me. forcing it to confront the darkness and fight back. "We can't stop. Not now," I shouted, every syllable strained, carving our path through the maelstrom of swirling shadows. I could see the flicker of hope just ahead, glittering like a beacon that promised salvation. But with a feral scream, the looming creature reached ahead, hands stretching impossibly far, making contact. It latched onto my shoulder, cold and unyielding, pulling me back with a force that felt like an icy vice. "Help!" I gasped, feeling the darkness clawing at me, wrapping around my mind like a vice. In that heartbeat, I saw her turn back, eyes wide with fear, rushing towards me. "No, don't!" I screamed, feeling the shadows tugging, trying to ensnare us both. But she reached me, grasping my other arm, pulling against the monstrous force that sought to drag me into the abyss. "I won't let you go," she shouted, determination blazing in her eyes. Together, we surged against the creature's pull, focusing on the light ahead, feeling its warmth wrapping around us. "We can do this," I yelled, pushing forward as the shadows claw at us, their razor-like presence shrieking in defiance, desperate to reclaim what they had lost. And as we strained against the weight of the darkness, I channeled every memory of light, every moment of clarity amid the turmoil, reaching for that flicker deep within. The power grew, bursting forth like flames in the night, and the shadows recoiled, howling in outrage. Finally, in that moment of raw energy, we surged forward together, a force against the walls jarring and shifting around us. The ground beneath us quaked, and the monstrous figure shrieked, suddenly losing its grip as it retracted into a whirlwind of shadows, consumed by the light we had unleashed. We dashed forward through the radiant portal, the shadows biting at our heels, but unable to latch on as the light enveloped us entirely, swallowing the darkness whole. Together, we crossed the threshold, escaping the torment of what had chased us, and finally emerged in a place of brilliance. The landscape undulated with warmth and safety, colors bursting forth in unfathomable shades. The air was fresh, scented with blooming flowers, and all around us, warmth pulsated like a heartbeat. It was a far cry from the darkness we had known, a stark contrast that struck both of us. But just as I began to breathe in this new reality, unease crept back into my mind. The shadows were gone for now, but the memories of their torment lingered like a heavy shadow cast over my heart. "Are we safe?" I whispered, a tinge of doubt threading my voice as I turned toward her, searching her face for reassurance. I think so," she replied, though her eyes mirrored my unease. Yet, as we stood amid the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something might still be lurking just beneath the surface, waiting, watching. But just as I began to breathe in this new reality, unease crept back into my mind. The shadows were gone, for now, but the memories of their torment lingered like a heavy shadow cast over my heart. I glanced around, half expecting to see the twisted figures lingering at the edges of the light, waiting for a chance to pounce. The vibrant colors and warm air contrasted sharply with the horror we had just escaped, yet something felt off. The brightness felt almost too artificial, like a facade covering the darkness underneath. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling as if sensing my thoughts. I'm not sure," I managed to say, aware of a lingering chill that clung to my spine. Then I noticed something strange. The flowers around us, vibrant and colorful, emitted a faint sound, like a whisper just beyond comprehension. I stepped closer to a cluster blooming at my feet, their petals glimmering softly. But as I leaned down, the whisper sharpened, coalescing into a chilling chorus of voices that echoed in my head. "Help us, help us!" I recoiled, stepping back in horror. The flowers seemed to shift, their colors darkening for just an instant, twisting into shadows before reverting back to their vibrant hues. "Did you hear that?" I gasped, my heart racing. "Hear what?" she asked, confusion etched on her face. "It was the flowers. They're speaking," I stammered, the words barely forming. But all I felt now was a sinking unease, as if the ground beneath was not solid, but a thin veil over a turbulent sea of darkness. Suddenly, the light around us flickered. The shadows that we had escaped began to bleed back into our sanctuary, creeping along the edges, soaking into the air. My breath caught in my throat. It's coming back! The realization hit like a cold wave. Her eyes widened in fear, and we both turned, instinctively searching for an escape as the atmosphere thickened with dread. In the distance, I could see movement at the periphery of our safe haven, dark silhouettes blending seamlessly into the bright colors, indistinguishable at first, but drawing closer, revealing sickly faces twisted in torment. "We need to go," I yelled, urgency pushing my feet to move even before she could respond. But as I spun around, clutching her hand tightly, I felt the ground tremble beneath us, a foreboding rumble that sent shivers racing down my spine. Where can we go?" she shouted, her voice rising in panic. Before I could answer, the landscape rippled and shuddered, as if responding to the creeping darkness. I stumbled, feeling my footing slip as the world around us distorted into nightmarish shapes. The sky darkened suddenly, eclipsing the brightness we had just found. There was no longer a safe place. The shadows that danced along the edges embraced the light, revealing the forms of the tortured beings we had encountered before. Their faces twisted in anguish, mouths opening in silent screams that echoed in our minds. "This way," I yelled, heading toward what looked like a path winding through trees that had sprung up from nowhere, their trunks gnarled and dark, exuding an unsettling aura. The space felt alive with malice, as if the very earth resented our presence. With every step, the ground crunched beneath us, the sound echoing like the distant crack of bones. Dread bubbled in my chest, and I could hear her breath hitch as we made our way deeper into this strange forest. The trees towered above us, their branches casting long shadows that flickered and shifted with the wind, resembling grasping hands reaching down to snatch us away. "What if they come after us?" she asked, her voice trembling as the shadows coiled around us like a suffocating blanket. "I won't let that happen," I breathed, forcing resolve into my words as we pushed forward. Each glance back revealed the dark figures lingering just beyond the trees, their wicked smiles grinning with anticipation, shadows swirling around them, feeding off our fear. Suddenly, the path we had been following twisted, leading us to a clearing bathed in an eerie silver light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. The center of the clearing was dominated by an ancient stone well, overgrown with sharp thorns and wild vines that twisted like serpents. The air grew cold, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow bleeding from the well. "Do you think we could hide in there?" she suggested hesitantly, her gaze flickering between the well and the trees behind us. I peered into the void at the bottom of the well, feeling a connection to the darkness that stirred below. "Maybe," I replied, my gut twisting with uncertainty. "But I'm afraid of what might be in there." As we stood debating, the temperature dropped even further. I could hear the soft cracking of ice, a sound more unnatural in this place of perpetual twilight. It was then that a low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the well, reverberating through the air like an ancient monster awakening from centuries of slumber. We both recoiled in fear, hearts pounding as the growl turned into a haunting melody, a lullaby sung by the lost, coaxing, pleading. Stay with us. Let's get away from here," I cried, grabbing her hand and pulling her away from the well's edge. I could feel the urging pull of the darkness behind us, the shadows swelling as if to consume the clearing entirely. But as we turned, the trees around us shifted, tangling their roots, blocking our path back the way we had come. The figures crept closer, twisted and distorted, faces shrieking in agony, silently begging to be freed from their torment. I felt an icy grip tighten around my heart as I realized we were trapped. The laughter of the shadows echoed, sounding almost jubilant as they closed in. We clung to each other, grounding one another in the face of the approaching dread. "Quick, the well!" I shouted, a desperate idea flaring in my mind. "We have to jump in?" It might be our only chance. What if it leads straight to them? She exclaimed, fear lacing her voice. I'd rather take my chances with the unknown than face them here, I urged, glancing back at the advancing shadows that twisted closer, mingling with the air. With no time left to hesitate, I took her hand, and we raced toward the well, feeling the ground tremble beneath us as the darkness surged forward, eager to claim us. The edges of the well loomed closer, and with a final burst of determination, we leapt into the abyss, letting ourselves fall into the dark. The air whirled around us, the gaping maw of the darkness swallowing us whole as we descended into silence, unsure of what awaited below. As we fell, the screams of those lost reverberated around us, echoing across the depths like a surreal symphony of despair. I felt the pressure of the darkness tight around our bodies, squeezing, consuming, but we pressed together, our resolve igniting even in the depths of panic. I closed my eyes tightly, felt the rush of air carrying us down into the uncertainty below, every heartbeat vibrating with the fear of what awaited us in the darkness. Would we finally escape into something safe? Or would we find ourselves further entrapped in an endless nightmare? Then, just before impact, everything went still. The darkness faded away, and I opened my eyes to see nothing. A void surrounded us, an endless stretch of shadows and whispers. Nothing physical to hold on to, just our intertwined hands and the rising dread within. I felt her grip tighten as we dangled in the void, both terrified and exhilarated. Where are we? She asked, her voice shaking as it echoed into the empty space. I don't know, I admitted, fear gnawing at my thoughts as the lingering presence of the creature throbbed in my mind. But we have to be careful. With that, the darkness around us began to pulse, gradually revealing a shape, something massive taking form in front of us. My heart raced as the figure solidified, a monstrous silhouette merging from the shadows. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, reflecting an insatiable hunger, and its mouth twisted into a wide grin, a predatory expression that made my skin crawl. It leaned closer, a rancid smell wafting towards us, the air thickening with a sense of impending doom. I felt my muscles tense, every instinct screaming that this creature had come to finish the hunt, to reclaim its prey. But instead of fleeing, I dug deep within, channeling every ounce of what I had left. Stay back, I shouted, my voice echoing in the void, defiance igniting a flicker of hope amid the fear. In that moment, I realized that we were not powerless. The darkness had been a part of us, but so was the light, the strength we carried, intertwined in our very souls. Do not let it take you, she called, her voice trembling with fear, yet fierce. With a roar, the creature lunged, towering above us in a flurry of shadows. But as it closed the distance, I felt a surge of light. That same flicker returned, blazing bright from the center of my heart. It burst forth, casting pure radiance around us, illuminating the light that flowed between us. The creature recoiled, hissing and screeching, shadows ripping apart as they fled from the brilliance radiating from our bond. We can fight it, I yelled, feeling our connection strengthen with each beat of our hearts. Emboldened, we stepped forward together, faces set with determination as we faced the creature. It mumbled incoherently, shattering the silence of the void, a symbol of terror that sought to intimidate, to instill fear. I channeled all that I had. Every moment of light we had fought for, every breath, together, we created a barrier that surged against the encroaching darkness, illuminating the void, filling the silence with a desperate fight for survival. With renewed vigor, we advanced against the creature, the light from our connection pushing the darkness further and further back, claiming our hope with every step we took. I felt her strength beside me, a warm pulse that fueled me, igniting a fierce power that surged into the looming shadow. In a moment of defiance, we unleashed a final blast of light, exploding outward like a supernova, and everything trembled. The shadows shrieked, caught in the brilliant wave of illumination that swept through the darkness, reclaiming every piece of despair they had consumed. As the creature writhed and twisted in panic, I could feel it losing its grip on this world, its monstrous form disintegrating under the power of our united light. With one final push, we thrust forward, and the creature shattered like glass, bursting into a million shards that faded away into the emptiness. The shadows screamed, the darkness dissipating around us as brightness erupted in waves, flooding every corner of the void. We were enveloped in a blinding glow, washing away the remnants of fear, despair, and darkness that had plagued us for so long. And as the light began to settle, I felt myself rise, lifted from the void and propelled toward a new reality. The landscape began to solidify, colors swirling around, blending seamlessly into the warmth I had yearned for. Breathless, I looked around, feeling the grip of fear loosen its hold. Together we emerged into a bright field, fresh and vibrant, a place where shadows no longer lingered. A safety and serenity washed over me, though the echoes of darkness still whispered at the corners. "Oh, my mind, are we safe now?" she breathed, her eyes reflecting the sky above filled with endless blue. I held her gaze, a mixture of hope and lingering trepidation lining my heart. "I think so," I whispered, though the caution remained, a reminder of the darkness we'd escaped. In that moment, I realized that though we had triumphed, the scars of our journey would always linger. For every shadow defeated, there might always be another lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in our light. But whatever came next, I knew we would face it together. In that moment, I realized that though we had triumphed, the scars of our journey would always linger. For every shadow defeated, there might always be another lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in our light. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the overwhelming relief flooding my senses. Yet, unease crackled at the edges of my consciousness, whispering warnings that something was still off. The field was beautiful, the flowers swayed gently, radiating warmth in every shade imaginable. Yet beneath the vibrancy, I noticed something unsettling. Their petals seemed almost too perfect, too symmetrical. I reached for one, fingers brushing against its smooth surface, and recoiled when a dark fluid oozed from the stem, pooling on the ground like fresh blood. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing my shift in mood as I pressed my fingertips against the grass, feeling a pulse beneath the surface that bloomed with panic. "Something doesn't feel right," I muttered, scanning the area again, searching for any signs of what we might still be up against. The atmosphere thickened with tension, the breeze no longer comforting, but carrying a cold edge that raised goosebumps along my arms. As I looked around, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, but nothing was there, just the billowing flowers dancing in the wind. Taking a step back, I nearly stumbled over the roots of a large, gnarled tree that had sprung up unexpectedly among the flowers. Its bark was twisted and dark, like it had been carved from nightmares, and I could swear I saw what looked like faces twisted into its surface, mouths contorted in silent cries. "Look," I pointed, panic mounting. "The tree, what's wrong with it?" She gasped, stepping in closer. "I don't like this," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Reaching out, I touched the rough bark, feeling a tremor pulse beneath my fingers. It was alive, vibrating with an energy that sent chills racing down my spine. Suddenly, I felt it shift, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that drew my focus deeper into the shadows clinging to its base. I dared to lean closer, but the instant I did, a whisper floated through the air, brushing past my ear. "Come closer, join us." I jumped back, heart pounding in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I stammered, eyes wide with dread. "Hear what?" She stepped back, apprehension creasing her brow. "Something, it spoke to me," I said, fear tightening my throat. "We have to go now?" We turned to run, but the ground beneath our feet began to tremble violently, roots propelling from the soil as if trying to reach out and grab us. I felt one lurch around my ankle, tugging me back towards the tree. "No, no!" I cried, pulling away with all my strength, but it was like fighting against a raging current. "Help me," she shouted, and I felt my heart shatter at the helplessness in her voice. I glanced back to see her struggling as shadows billowed around her, tendrils snaking in like living darkness. "Hold on!" I screamed, charging back, adrenaline coursing through me. Gathering my strength, I reached for her, but more shadows slithered across the ground faster than I could react, wrapping around her waist and pulling her deeper into the grasp of the now malevolent tree. Its bark seemed to pulse, throbbing as it consumed the light that lingered around us. I couldn't let them take her. My heart raced in panic as I lunged forward. My only thought was to break through the encroaching shadows. "Let her go!" I shouted, my voice hoarse as I could feel the warmth of my own light flickering, threatening to extinguish. Driven by desperation, I ripped at the roots binding her, my hands trembling as I felt her warmth slip away like sand. The shadows whispered madness, granting me visions of twisted paths to hopelessness. I could see my nightmares unfold in front of me, taunting me with the image of her fading away into darkness. "Stay with me," I cried, bracing against the weight of the creeping terror that edged closer. "I'm right here." I felt a surge of light emanate from the depths of my being, fueled by the bond we shared. It flared like a beacon, driving back the shadows momentarily. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and hope intertwined, and I could see the flicker of our shared determination igniting within them. With renewed resolve, I directed every ounce of that light toward her, flinging it against the encroaching darkness. I felt the energy channel through me as I pulled against the shadows, attempting to siphon away our hope. The roots screamed in resistance, shriveling from the intensity of our light. "Together!" I shouted, desperation and adrenaline fueling my voice. "Let's break free!" As if answering my call, she gathered her strength, pushing against the shadows with me, and together we wrenched our arms away from the grasp of darkness. The roots recoiled, snapping back into the earth as waves of light surged through us, exploding outward and illuminating the nightmarish tree in a brilliant glow. But as quickly as the light surged, I felt an unsettling shift in the air. The shadows writhed, hissing like angry serpents, and the tree began to howl in fury as its grip on us weakened. "You cannot escape," a voice bellowed, reverberating through the ground and into the very marrow of my bones. I staggered backward, disoriented by the sudden change in the atmosphere. The shadows swirling more frantically, fraying at the edges like old fabric. "It's angry," I gasped, backing away as the darkness steadied itself, gathering strength in a bid for retaliation. The ground trembled again, but this time the tremors came from everywhere, shaking the very foundation of the vivid world we stood in. The flowers began to wilt, petals dropping like tears, staining the grass in shades of dark crimson as if the earth itself was bleeding. "We need to get out of here," she yelled, her voice filled with fear. "Where?" I shouted, panic tightening around my chest as I realized we were encircled by the hostile shadows, their whispers now mingling with the howling wind. Then the shadows coalesced, morphing into a swirling vortex that rose into the air like a monstrous column of darkness. My heart raced with dread as I felt it pulling at us, inviting us to join the chaos. "Hold on!" I yelled, gripping her hand tightly, searching for a way through. But the shadows spun faster, disorienting us, and I felt our grip slipping. We were losing ground, enveloped in the tempest of darkness that screamed for our surrender. "Fight!" I cried, forcing every ounce of light within me, pushing against it. And in that moment, I realized the whispers were familiar, echoes of the faces I had seen in the darkness, shadows of the lost, those who had succumbed to this nightmare. They reached out, their ghostly hands brushing against my skin, urging me to join them in despair. "Together!" I shouted one last time, focusing on the bond we shared, igniting the light inside me like a raging inferno. Together we unleashed a pulse of brilliance, coursing through the air and piercing the dark like a spear. The shadows shrieked, twisting in agonized fury as our light shifted the very foundation of this nightmarish reality. The vortex trembled, exploding outward, forcing the darkness to retreat momentarily, revealing colorful glimmers beneath. The colors we thought had vanished. Then, in an instant, the ground gave way, and we were flying back, rushing away from the chaos, propelled by the force of our united light. I felt a surge of exhilaration as colors exploded around us, the dark remnants dissolving like mist. I held onto her tightly, feeling the warmth radiating from her, the fragile hope blooming as we surged forth into the bright expanse. But an unsettling thought crept in. What if this was just a temporary reprieve? What if the darkness was merely regrouping, biding its time for our weakness? As we hurtled through the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that this journey wasn't over. We might have escaped for now, but as shadows faded into the distance, I knew that lurking just beyond the horizon, the shade of despair still awaited our return. And with that realization, the fear settled heavy in my chest, a nagging reminder that darkness thrives on fear, and it never truly gives up. So, I pressed on, fueled by the light we had forged together, determined to protect what was still ours in a world that threatened to unravel again. "Let's keep moving," I said, holding her hand tightly as we ventured deeper into the unknown. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, defying the shadows that wished to see us consumed. But even as determination surged within me, I couldn't shake the lingering whispers echoing through my mind. The shadows may have receded, but something remained, and I felt its hungry gaze watching us from the depths of the distance. I moved forward, tugging her along as if the very act of putting distance between us and the darkness would keep us safe. The vibrant colors began to fade again, the edges of the bright world blurring into a murky grayscale. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. Shadows fluttered at the corners of my vision, and I felt that twisting sensation in my gut again, as if something was lurking, waiting to pounce. "I don't know," I admitted, glancing around as a chill crawled up my spine. The ground beneath our feet felt unstable, like it could give way at any moment. I could sense the air growing thick with tension, almost suffocating in its oppressive weight. We pressed on, but the path became twisted, as if we had stepped into a dream gone wrong, the terrain morphing into strange shapes that felt alive. The trees around us began to lean inward, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers, clawing at the dimming light. "Do you see that?" I whispered, pointing to a flicker in the distance. It was a shadow flitting between the trees, moving too quickly for me to identify. Fear lanced through me, and I gripped her hand tighter. "I don't like this," she said, her voice shaking. "We should turn back." I looked back, and to my horror, the radiant light we had just escaped seemed miles away, shrouded in darkness. The darkness was pulling us back, inviting us to surrender. I could practically feel its insidious tendrils reaching for us, coiling around my thoughts. "No," I said firmly, forcing my feet to move. "We can't go back. Keep moving forward." We continued down the path, but the forest grew denser, each step heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was reluctant to let us through. And then we came upon a clearing, but it was unlike any we had encountered before. In the center stood a single, cracked mirror, its surface darkened and warped, reflecting nothing but the surrounding shadows. The moment I set eyes on it, a surge of dread wound its way through me. "Don't look into it," I warned, feeling an instinctual urge to protect her. But even as I spoke, I struggled to tear my own gaze away, drawn to its depths like a moth to a flame. "What is that?" she asked, her curiosity piquing despite the terror hanging in the air. "I don't know," I replied, backing away slowly, hoping to pull her with me. "But something feels wrong." Before I could pull her away, she took a step closer, the mirror reflecting the fear in her eyes. "It might show us a way out," she suggested, but I saw the way her fingers twitched, as if the mirror held some magnetic pull over her. "Don't!" I shouted, but my voice echoed as if swallowed by the shadows. She paused, and for a moment it felt like time stretched. The air thickened, and the murmurings of the darkness grew louder, as if the shadows were trying to interrupt our thoughts. "Please don't," I repeated, my heart racing as I felt the darkness swell around us. The mirror pulsed with energy, drawing closer, warping reality itself. I could see shapes forming within it, faces twisted in anguish, trapped in a cycle of torment, reaching out with mouths silently screaming. And then, in a split second, the mirror rippled, and I swear I saw a reflection of myself. But I was not alone. Another figure stood beside me, my own reflection, but darker, eyes glinting like pools of ink, malicious and filled with something unnameable. "Why don't you come closer?" it whispered through the glass, voice dripping with honeyed malice. "You can be free, just take my hand." "No!" I shouted, backing away, but the darkness pressed in, coiling around my legs like a predator closing the distance. "Get away from it!" "Stop!" she screamed, but it was too late. I could feel myself being pulled closer, each step toward the mirror a battle against a weight pressing down on me. Suddenly, the whispers sharpened. "Come join us. Join the ones who have given in. You're tired? Aren't you? Just give in, it will be easier." A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I fought against the seductive call, feeling my will bend beneath the onslaught of terror. With every ounce of strength left, I struggled to pull her back, screaming with desperation. "We have to go. We can't stay here." But she seemed frozen, trapped in the mirror's reflection, entranced by the dark figure that mirrored me. "It knows us," she whispered, eyes wide, as if realizing something terrible. "It knows everything about us. What if it can help?" "No!" I shouted, but the echo of my voice drowned in the collective moan of the shadows. Just as I feared losing her completely, I saw the trees around the clearing convulsing, branches twisting and contorting as if alive, their roots pulling against the ground, clawing at the world to usher forth whatever pain they had absorbed. Darkness erupted, pouring forth from the mirror like a tidal wave that crashed into us. I felt it wrapping around my body, suffocating light and worshipping misery. "Fight it!" I yelled, desperation twisting my voice. I dug deep within myself. With a primal roar, I expelled every ounce of light I had left, a brilliant flare that pierced the suffocating darkness, threatening to obliterate it. The shadows winced and shrieked, recoiling into the depths, pulling their tendrils back from the mirror. But the reflection of my darker self smiled, mockery dripping from its lips as it whispered, "You can't escape your own darkness. Fight!" I screamed again, feeling my spirit rising against the despair. The light surged between us, flaring brighter and brighter, finally breaking her free from the mirror's hold. She stumbled back, eyes wide, her face pale. "What did I just see? We have to leave!" I urged, and we turned, sprinting back into the forest, fueled by fear and adrenaline. But as we ran, a deep rumble resounded behind us. The mirror had begun to crack, spreading like a web of darkness throughout the clearing, snapping and splintering. The ground shook violently, the air screaming as it tore itself apart. The trees began to sway, their roots becoming serpentine, writhing toward us, trying to latch onto our ankles. "Keep going," I yelled, pulling her along as I felt the chaos unfolding behind, a maelstrom of shadows looking to reclaim us. We dashed deeper into the forest, the path twisting and turning like a labyrinth, but the light within me flickered like a candle in a storm. With every step I took, I could feel the shadows clawing at my heels, their whispers relentless. "You cannot escape. You belong to us." Then I saw it. A fork in the path, one side illuminated by an eerie luminescence, the other shrouded in complete darkness. My heart raced as I hesitated, torn between the two. "Which way?" she asked, panic spilling into her voice. "Let's try the light," I breathed, my instincts rallying. But as we made our choice, I felt the darkness surge behind us, exploding into chaos, the shadows coiling tighter with every frightened breath we took. And then it happened. The shadows coalesced into a figure, taller than any of the trees, its form cloaked in the deepest abyss, lips curling into a sadistic grin. "Did you think you could escape me?" it crooned, a voice dripping with malice and mockery, echoing through the forest. The figure stepped closer, eyes glowing with a flickering light that sent terror racing through my veins. This was no mere shadow. It was something far darker, more sinister. Instinctively, I pulled her closer, the connection granting me strength, but the darkness crackled with rage, its grip tightening around us, squeezing the very air from my lungs. "We'll fight it. We'll make it," I shouted, hoping to awaken that blazing light within her too. The figure's laughter rolled through the trees, drowning out my words, growing louder, more chilling. "You stand no chance against me," it taunted, shadows twisting around its form like tendrils reaching to pull us in. This was a creature born from despair and nightmares, a specter of our fears gathering strength from our every misstep. I felt the pull of fear gnawing at me, but I could not concede. I lifted my chin, light rippling through me, igniting a fire that had to burn brighter. We would resist. We would keep fighting until the very end. "Together!" I shouted, thrusting my free hand out, channeling everything I had into that flicker of brilliance, begging her to mirror it. The creature screeched in fury, pressing forward, determined to extinguish us. But as the pulsing light exploded from within, I watched as the shadows recoiled, flinching back from our combined strength. "Keep feeding it," I urged, feeling our energies entwine as our lights illuminated the darkening woods around us. The ground shook. The figure wavered for an instant, a flicker of doubt crossing its twisted features. It was fear of our resilience. The shadows shrieked in protest. But as we pushed forward steadily, inch by inch, the darkness began to wane, dissolving into nothingness. But just as hope began to bloom within me, I felt something shift in the air again, something more sinister, lurking just beyond our reach, a malevolence that watched our struggle with glee. I realized this battle was not just with one creature, but with the essence of all dread that followed us, waiting for the moment we let our guard down. I had to stay alert. I had to keep moving. Despite the weight of fear crushing my heart, I steeled myself, ready to face whatever emerged next. Because even if we passed this test, I knew in the depths of my soul that the true nightmare was yet to reveal itself. As the last remnants of darkness shriveled in the light we wielded, a heavy silence descended upon the forest. The trees stood still, an eerie stillness blanketing the clearing, almost too peaceful after the chaos we had just faced. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling as uncertainty danced in her eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't know," I replied, scanning our surroundings with unease. My instinct screamed at me to keep moving, the oppressive air still thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. Then I saw it. The shadows were not gone. They were lurking, held at bay by our light, but eager to return. They stretched along the ground, creeping outward from the bruised earth, curling around our feet like fingers, seeking an opening. Suddenly, the silence shattered like glass. The sound of a crackling whisper slid through the air, materializing from the shadows. "You cannot escape what is inside you," it hissed, a voice slithering through my mind. An icy chill coursed down my spine, bringing with it memories I wished to forget. I turned to her, but her expression remained pale, fear lurking behind her wide eyes. "What does it mean?" she asked, panic creeping into her tone. "It means that this is just beginning," I replied, dread wrapping around my heart. I could feel my body tense, as if bracing for an impact that had yet to arrive. Before I could react, a rush of blackness shot forward, enveloping us both in a suffocating shroud. It swallowed the light whole. The brightness we had fought for snuffed out like a match in the wind. "Run!" I yelled, adrenaline propelling me as I pulled her with me. But the shadows twisted around us like smoke, clawing at our limbs and attempting to anchor us to the ground. With each frantic step, I felt the darkness pulling me back, whispering promises of peace and surrender. We have to get to the edge of the forest. It has to be there, I shouted, my voice ragged as I fought against the encroaching hopelessness. We stumbled deeper into the forest, the familiar path now obscured by dense fog that crept in like a living creature, veiling our escape. Dark shapes flitted just beyond the veil, flashes of movement catching my eye. But when I turned to look, nothing was there. The laughter began again, a cacophony of twisted, jagged sounds echoing around us. All the dark figures, the trapped souls from the mirror, had returned, their faces glistening with despair, their hollow eyes peering through the mist. Join us, they chanted, a haunting melody that clawed at my sanity. I gritted my teeth, pushing back against the voices. No, I won't. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the earth throbbing with energy, and ahead I spotted a faint glimmer, barely visible through the fog. Look, I shouted, pointing toward the light. But even as I spoke, the chuckles morphed into rage, and the laughter grew louder, more insistent. The shadows thickened into a wall, barricading our way, threatening to swallow us whole. And that's when I heard it, a soft, childlike giggle breaking through the chaos, high-pitched and filled with an unsettling mirth. Why are you afraid? It cooed, echoing off the trees. I stopped dead, every part of me screaming to run, but I turned my head slowly in the direction of the sound. The fog swirled, parting just enough for me to catch a glimpse of a small figure, no taller than a child, standing just beyond the reach of the light. The figure was cloaked in tattered rags, a wild mane of dark hair cascading down around its thin shoulders, obscuring its face. Unsettling shadows danced beneath it, flickering and writhing like serpents. Come play with us, it whispered, the sweetness of its voice laced with something far more sinister, like honey, mixed with poison. It reached out, a delicate hand beckoning us closer. Don't look at it, I shouted, grabbing her arm and turning away, but the girl's laughter echoed in my head, drawing me back to the specter standing in the mist. Why are you so scared? It taunted, a grin splitting its pale face, revealing teeth that glinted like shards of broken glass. We just want to have fun. No, it's a trap, I yelled, pulling her tighter against me, every instinct roaring against the temptation of that innocent face. But as I glanced again, confusion washed over me. The deeper I looked at the figure, the less childlike it seemed. Shadows flickered over its features, distorting its form. It was no child. It was clearly a creature born of darkness, a mockery of innocence cloaked in deceit. We don't have to be alone, it said, voice lilting, each word twisting in the air like a serpent wrapping around our limbs. We can be friends. No friends here, I shouted, and every ounce of light within me surged again, illuminating our immediate surroundings. The creature hesitated, pulling back slightly, but its grin widened, eyes gleaming with malice. You don't understand, it hissed, motioning toward the shadows. We are many. We are everywhere. I felt the air grow cold and heavy, suffocating me with fear. In an instant, the shadows whipped around the clearing, swirling in a frenzy, and the ghostly whispers crescendoed into a roar of haunting screams. Come join us, they thrummed in harmony, a chilling chorus that vibrated through my bones. No, I cried out as the darkness pressed against my chest, almost palpable, threatening to crush my spirit beneath its weight. With a deep breath, I lifted my light higher, pushing against the onslaught, and the shadows hissed, recoiling. But I knew it was only temporary. They were relentless, watching for any weakness, waiting to strike again. Keep moving, I urged her, clutching her hand as we sprinted back into the depths of the forest, dodging grasping branches and ensnaring roots that seemed alive with hostility. But with each stride, a sense of foreboding crept in. What if we couldn't escape? The forest twisted and turned, branches snapping above us, each sound echoing like a death knell. Bleak thoughts gnawed at the edges of my mind, shadows crawling up my spine. I could feel the darkness gathering behind us, a relentless predator exploiting every ounce of fear. Then suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, collapsing into an abyss, and the darkness rushed forward, shadowy arms extending, reaching for us both. "No!" I gasped, just managing to pull her back before we plunged into the void. But in that moment, I felt the pull of darkness tightening around me, eager to reclaim me. The coldness seeped into my very bones, whispering promises of peace and endless slumber, a sweet temptation urging me to let go. "Stay with me," I shouted, holding her tighter. "I'm here." Her voice cut through the fog, but I could sense the weight of fear straining her words, the fight within us faltering against the overwhelming despair. I would not yield. Drawing from the dim light of hope still flickering within, I summoned every ounce of energy I could muster. "Together, we can break through." As if responding to my call, an almost imperceptible shimmer flickered through the forest, a thread of silver light piercing the darkness that surrounded us. It twisted and shimmered, illuminating our path for a brief flicker of time. "Follow the light," I yelled, thrusting my hand out toward the glimmering thread. We charged forward together, the shadows snapping at our heels, howls echoing in our wake. "You can't outrun your fate," the voice from the dark screeched, sending a bone-chilling wave of terror through me. But I drove forward, plunging into the light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I could feel the energy surge through my limbs, lifting us just above the chaos that wanted to consume us. In that moment of clarity, I realized something. The true power of light sprang not just from the outside, but from within, our bond ignited by shared fears, hopes, and the depths of our souls. With a final push, we flew toward the light, feeling it envelop us like a warm embrace, pulling us away from the darkness. The shadows howled in fury, clawing at the edges of our souls as we escaped the grasp of the abyss. But as we emerged into the brightness, I felt a stir of unease, a sense that while we had escaped this stretch of darkness, the malevolence was still prevalent, lurking in the corners of our minds, waiting for an opening to strike again. The realization settled heavily on me. This battle might be won, but the war against the shadows was far from over. In the heart of the light, a new terror awaited, ready to test our resilience again. We emerged into a new clearing, brighter, but somehow more unsettling. The ground beneath us pulsed with that strange energy, thrumming like a heartbeat, but it felt wrong, unnatural. Instead of vibrant colors, everything was muted, a washed-out palette that left me feeling uneasy. Trees stood tall like sentinels, their bark appearing gnarled and twisted, faces etched deeply into their trunks as if they were suffering. Most unnerving were the branches, long and spindly, drooping as if they were weeping silently. I could almost hear a whimpering sound echoing among the leaves, muffled and sorrowful, sending chills up my spine. Holding her hand tightly, I scanned the edges of the clearing, apprehension building within me. "What is this place?" I whispered, half expecting the shadows to slither back and engulf us. "We shouldn't have come here," she murmured, her voice tinged with a mixture of fear and regret. And that's when I saw it, a shadow darting between the trees, quick and fluid, moving out of the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, but there was nothing. My heart raced. "Did you see that?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. She nodded slowly, her eyes wide, reflecting my own fear. The atmosphere felt thicker now, saturated with something malignant just beyond our sight. Before I could respond, the ground jerked beneath us. A long shudder ran through the earth, sending waves of panic coursing through my veins. I stumbled, barely managing to keep my balance, but she fell hard against the cold, damp ground. "Get up," I urged, reaching for her as darkness began to swirl at the edges of my vision. Shadows lunged forth, resembling the terror from before, but this time they didn't just whisper. They shrieked, a cacophony of anguish that pierced through the stillness like knives. "Help me," she cried, scrambling to her feet, and for a fleeting moment, I regretted my impulsive nature. I could sense the shadows pressing in from all sides, a tide of despair that threatened to engulf us. I felt their cold breath on the back of my neck, wrapping around me like a noose, trying to pull me back into the depths. "Focus," I shouted, forcing my attention back to the threads of light that stirred within me. "We can't give in." We pushed forward, sprinting deeper into the clearing as shadows chased us, howling with rage. With each step, the temperature plummeted, and the air grew thick, sloshing around us like a heavy fog. I could hear the whispers again, taunting and jeering, reminding us of our deepest fears. "Soon, you will join us," they rasped, voices overlapping, creating a sickening symphony of dread. Then we saw it, a stark figure standing in the middle of the clearing. It was shrouded in an eerie, ghostly light, its form shifting and distorting like smoke. I felt an immediate sense of dread wash over me. The figure oozed malice, reminiscent of the dark reflection I had seen before. "Stay back!" I warned her, the instinct to protect surging within me. It raised its arm, fingers slender and elongated, beckoning us closer with a slow, deliberate motion. "You cannot escape what you truly are," it crooned, voice sickly sweet, yet dripping with venom. "You are destined to be one with us? Don't listen," I shouted, grabbing her hand tighter. "We cannot let this thing get to us." But she seemed entranced, her eyes wide and unblinking, as though caught in a trance. "It knows me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, it's lying," I urged, struggling to pull her back. But the darkness began to seep into the ground, tendrils reaching up, twisting around our ankles. I felt the grip tightening, as if trying to pull us both toward that malevolent creature. "Why do you resist?" the figure asked, amusement lurking beneath its words. "Give in to the shadows. Embrace your truth." Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain rip through my chest, a cold shard of fear driving into my heart. My vision blurred, and the world around us twisted, the trees warping their forms, pulling away into shadows. "Fight it!" I screamed, taking a step backward, desperate to shake away the weight of despair that threatened to crush me. I could see her wavering, caught in that suffocating light as her features shifted, revealing glimpses of that darkness lurking deep within her eyes. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that had started to swirl violently around us, uprooting leaves and tossing them into the air like confetti of misery. "No, we are stronger than this," I yelled, desperation clawing at my throat. I focused on the bond we shared, our fears, our light, the moments we had fought through together. Drawing from that connection, I ignited the spark within. With a surge of energy, I pulled her closer, the light within me expanding and enveloping us both. "Remember who you are," I shouted, channeling everything I had into our shared moments of bravery. Even the laughter, the warmth, the hope we had fought for. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing in anger. I could feel their grip slackening, their howls becoming uncertain as the light began to break through. The figure snarled, its twisted face morphing into a snarl of anger. "You think you can resist? You think you can escape?" And with that, the darkness exploded outward, a horrific wave crashing against our light. It stuttered and flickered for a moment, nearly retreating, but then I felt it, a pulse, an energy gathering, feeding on my fear, strengthening itself. "No, we can't let it win," I shouted, and I thrust my hands forward, sending waves of light spiraling out through the dark. I felt the connection to her surge, intertwining as we fought together against the rising tide of despair. The clearing began to transform, shadows flinging themselves away from the light, unable to bear the onslaught. But still, the figure lunged at us, barreling through like a storm, rage emanating off it in waves. "Embrace your fear and despair," it roared, and as it lunged forward, I could see the depth of darkness swirling just behind its eyes, centuries of pain, loss, and torment trapped within. "Do you know what awaits you on the other side?" it taunted, the words dripping like poison, entangling within the air around us. "No," I yelled back, the golden light radiating fiercely from within us, illuminating the darkness with every ounce of strength I could muster. But then I felt it, something terrible pulling in my consciousness. The shadows ripped through the edges of my mind like icy fingers, flaying at my resolve. Memories surged unbidden. The feeling of suffocating loneliness, the whispers of doubt creeping in when I felt most vulnerable. Let it in, the figure urged, its voice winding around my thoughts. You want to give in? You want to be free of the struggle? Images flickered through my mind. Past failures, the moments when I felt lost, the darkness that teased at the edges of my spirit. It was overwhelming, a cacophony of emotions that threatened to drown me, and I felt myself slipping. "Don't!" she screamed, sharply, yanking me back. I could feel the warmth of her hand anchoring me, pulling me toward that flickering light of hope once more. "We are stronger together," I shouted, digging deep within the core of my being, fighting against the tide of despair. We forged onward, engulfed in a surge of shared light, pushing against the shadows that clung to our heels, yearning to consume us. I could feel the energy swirling around us, weaving a brighter path through the murky darkness that sought to engulf us. With every step, we stumbled, yet we rose again, a flicker of defiance shining brightly in the depths of our shared struggle. And through it all, the figure watched us, rage boiling within it, shadows rippling like a storm ready to consume everything in its wake. Just as we broke through, the figure unleashed a piercing wail, its voice intermingling with the howl of the shadows, blending together into an unholy symphony of despair. "You cannot escape what you are." In that moment, I understood. The shadows were relentless, yes, but so were we. And just like the shadows, we were a reflection of our fears, and we had the power to turn that fear against them. "Keep moving," I yelled again, heart pounding in my chest as we sprinted toward the faint glow in the distance, pushing ourselves harder, refusing to let the darkness consume us. But as we neared the light, I felt a cold breath wash over me, something ancient and powerful. My heart sank as I realized we were still far from safety, and with every step, I could feel the malevolence gathering behind us like a beast poised to strike. The clearing grew darker as the trees leaned closer, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the last remnants of hope. The laughter picked up again, a chilling symphony that echoed around us, drowning out everything as it crescendoed into a whirlwind of chaos. "Join us, enjoy the end," the voices harmonized, deep and unsettling, weaving through the chaos like a thread, pulling at my sanity. And in that haunting moment, as I caught a glimpse of the shadows swirling violently around us, I understood that this battle was merely a prelude. The true darkness that awaited lay deeper within, the truths we had buried under layers of fear, pain, and doubt. "What if we can't outrun it?" she whispered, despair creeping into her voice as she succumbed to the dread encroaching upon us. "We can," I shouted, steeling my resolve. I would not surrender. Fierce determination flooded through me like wildfire, illuminating every dark corner of my soul. We had fought too hard to turn back now, and I couldn't let fear win. As we pressed on into the swirling shadows, I understood it wasn't just our fight against darkness. It was also about embracing the light within, even when all seemed lost. With that thought, I took a step forward, knowing that if we were to escape, it would take everything we had left. We charged ahead, my breath coming in frantic gasps, each pulse of fear pushing me further into the unknown. The haze began to shift, swirling in a sinister dance that made it hard to tell where the ground ended and the shadows began. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the darkness itself was trying to pull me back into the depths. "Stay close," I called out, turning to glance at her. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own, but I could also see something else lurking behind it. Doubt, perhaps a hint of surrender. The very thought made my stomach twist into knots. Suddenly, the air grew thick with whispers, malevolent voices slithering through the fog, wrapping around us like chains. They were unmistakable now, each syllable dripping with malice. "Why fight?" they hissed, their tone both mocking and seductive. "Join us in our eternal embrace. We offer freedom from pain. Don't listen," I shouted, trying to drown them out, but their words wormed into my mind, twisting my resolve. I could feel the shadows curling around my ankles, a suffocating grip that threatened to hold me in place. I pushed myself forward, fighting against the pull of despair, but as I glanced back, I caught a glimpse of her face. She was staring at something behind me, expression frozen in terror. "What is it?" I demanded, fear slicing through me like a knife. It's there," she stammered, pointing toward the thickening darkness. And as I turned, my stomach dropped. Emerging from the shadows was a figure, towering and grotesque, cloaked in a tattered shroud that seemed to consume the very light around it. Its face was a void, an emptiness so profound it made me feel sick. There were no eyes, no features, just an abyss that seemed to promise endless suffering. "Come to me," it crooned, the voice like velvet, wrapping around me like a vice. "You will find what you seek. Just let go." I felt a surge of panic, a visceral response to the thing's presence. I tugged at her arm, pulling her close, but she seemed entranced, her wide eyes staring into that void, as if it held the answers to her deepest yearnings. "Help me," she whispered, voice trembling, and for a moment, I feared I was losing her to that dark pull. "No!" I shouted, grasping her shoulder and shaking her lightly. "Fight it! We can't let it win!" A low growl rippled through the creature, shaking the air around us. "What do you fear?" it asked, voice laced with cruel amusement. "You, who run from your truth. You will never escape your fate." Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled violently, and the shadows surged forward, a dark wave crashing against our defenses. It felt as if the very earth wanted to swallow us whole, each passing second crushing the last remnants of light. With desperation clawing at my throat, I forced myself to remember the moments that kept me going. The laughter shared, the warmth in the darkest of times, and the bond that tethered us to each other despite all odds. "Together, remember us," I cried, urgency flooding my voice. The light within began to flicker, and an ember ignited from my core. I raised my hands, willing that energy to come forth, pulling her closer as I summoned all I had left. The glowing warmth spread through us like a wildfire, pushing against the encroaching shadows. But the creature lurched closer, its form shifting like mist, greatly distorting as it prepared to lash out. "You think you can fight what you are?" it snapped, fury glinting like lightning in a storm. "Don't let it win," I urged, feeling her grip go slack for just a moment. It was a moment of hesitation, of doubt biting at her resolve. Just then, the air grew cold, and a dreadful silence filled the space, a pause that felt like the still between heartbeats. I felt the shadows bustling around us, waiting for the slightest indication of surrender. I could almost hear their breathing, low and ragged, as if they were a living entity, desperate to devour what remained of our light. "Just let the darkness in," the voices whispered, eerily sweet and seductive. "It can ease your pain. It can give you freedom." My heart raced, terror clawing in my insides. It was trying to break us, to make us doubt ourselves. No, we won't," I rasped, feeling the weight of their words pressing down on me. A flicker of light pulsed through me, igniting the shared hope between us. "Remember who you are," I shouted again, gripping her hand tightly, refusing to let the shadows take hold. The creature recoiled slightly, its form wavering, as if my words were something tangible that could push back the void. I seized that moment, pouring every ounce of my will into the light that ignited from both of us. The shadows hissed, swirling faster, angry at our defiance. I could see them twisting and writhing, trying to penetrate our newfound light, but we stood firm, pushing back against the tide. Then, all at once, the dark figure lunged for us, its void-like mouth opening wide in a scream that echoed through the clearing, a terrible sound that filled me with dread. "You'll regret this," it bellowed, the threat dripping from its voice. Before I could react, the shadows surged around it, engulfing the figure in a swirling vortex of darkness. I felt a cold rush of panic swell within me, my instincts screaming that we were now facing something far worse than before. Suddenly, the shadows began to lurch toward us, a cacophony of tortured wails rushing forward as if the very world were imploding. The creature, momentarily lost in the shadows, whispered wickedly through the shrieks, "You cannot hide from yourselves, from your own darkness. You won't win," I yelled back, emboldened by fury, firing every ounce of determination into our resisting light, which began to grow brighter. But then, the atmosphere shifted, and I swore I could feel the dark tendrils probing my mind again, racing through my thoughts, dredging up fears I had buried deep. Memories of failures and regrets began to surface, threatening to pull me down into despair once more. "Let us show you," the dark voices crooned, caressing the edges of my consciousness. "Embrace what you've buried." "No!" I shouted into the void, tears streaming down my face. But with each passing second, the shadows fell heavier. I struggled not to remember the pain of past loss, the love I had lost, the friendships that had crumbled, the loneliness that crept in during the darkest nights. Intense despair clawed at my throat, and for a moment, I faltered, nearly falling into that pit of anguish. The shadowy figures surged closer, the air vibrating with their desperate whispers. "Let it go. You don't have to fight." But I would not crumble. I drew from the bond we shared, the warmth of our memories becoming an anchor in the storm. "Focus on us. We are stronger than this," I shouted, feeling her hand tighten around my own, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the shadows lunged toward us with a violent intensity, engulfing everything in darkness. I felt a surge of coldness envelop me, wrapping around my heart like a noose. Yet just as I thought all hope was lost, I remembered the warmth of our shared laughter, the golden rays of joy from happier days, and a light so deeply rooted within me. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed back with a primal scream, channeling that painful light into a force that exploded outward. In that moment, the shadows writhed in agony, recoiling as if they had met a fierce flame. Light exploded in a shower of brilliance, momentarily illuminating the pitch-black clearing. But as I looked around, something changed. The landscape twisted beneath my feet, shifting shapes and new forms starting to emerge from the swirling darkness. In that brief moment of clarity, I recognized a different kind of horror. The foul beings that crawled from the shadows were not merely tendrils of darkness. They took on a grotesque shape, faces that mirrored my deepest fears. "Welcome, welcome to our realm," they hissed, filling the air with a vicious sort of glee. "You are just like us." I recoiled, horrified, heart pounding in my chest. "No!" I roared, but they only laughed, the sound cold and empty, reverberating through the clearing like an insane melody. Shadows stretched out from them, reaching for me, pulling at the edges of my psyche with icy fingers. "You think you can escape your truth?" their voices sang, harmonizing in a way that sent chills down my spine. "We are all that you fear. Come play with us." The figures danced around us, a macabre performance that swirled into chaos, pulling at my sanity. My mind reeled, overwhelmed with terror. I felt the grip of despair close tighter around me, suffocating, trying to drag me down into the depths where I would be lost forever. Desperate and shaking, I realized that our only hope lay within the bond that had once empowered us. "We can do this," I shouted, focusing on the light we had created together. With every ounce of willpower, I harnessed that light, forcing it to expand. "Remember who we are. We are stronger than this." And just like that, in a surge of brilliance, the shadows recoiled again, faces contorting in rage, fear offsetting their sinister glee. "You cannot escape," they roared, retreating momentarily. As they pulled back, I felt a glimmer of hope ignite inside me, each beat of my heart resonating with determination. I would not give in, but in the depths of the darkness, another presence emerged, something even more primal and horrid. A voice erupted with a furious growl that reverberated like thunder. "You will fall." Just then, the ground beneath us cracked, fissures splitting wide as darkness seeped from the depths, revealing a chasm that seemed to hold ancient horrors. The walls of the chasm pulsated with an unnatural rhythm, exuding a musty odor that made my stomach churn. As the shadows began to creep toward us from the chasm, a deep sense of dread washed over me. It felt as if time slowed, the very air thick with unspeakable terror. "No, please," I gasped, feeling the terror clawing at the edges of my sanity. Silhouetted figures twisted and turned at the edges of the chasm, their outlines barely visible, yet distinct enough to invoke a sense of primal fear. They beckoned, motioning with long, bony fingers that shimmered with shadow. "Join us, join us," they sang in a haunting tone that echoed from the chasm. The melody was both hypnotic and horrific, creeping into my mind like a toxic fog. "Don't look, don't listen," I shouted, more for myself than for her, trying to navigate the overwhelming dread clawing at my chest. The fight within me surged, heart racing as I looked into those void-like eyes, the shadows reflecting my fears, my regrets, and all the darkness I had ever faced. "Fight!" I screamed, unwilling to let despair win this time. With every ounce of energy and light that we had left, I surged forward into the dark, determined to reclaim our hope and keep our connection alive, but the pull of the chasm loomed ever closer. The figures twisted around us, their whispers blending together into a cacophony of despair. "You cannot escape. You belong with us." I felt the shadows tightening their grip, but I swiped my arm outward, willing that ancient fear to dissolve before my inner flame. Just when I thought we were lost, a bright beam shot into the darkness, illuminating the chasm with raw, blinding light. The opposing forces clashed, light against dark, courage against fear. I could feel the energy bubbling, surging from within us both, weaving together, igniting flames of strength against the all-consuming void. "Together!" I yelled, pushing forward as tendrils of light shot from my hands, blasting against the creeping shadows, forcing them to retreat just enough for us to breathe again. Yet deep within the chasm, a sinister voice echoed, louder than before, vibrating through the very air we breathed. "You cannot escape your darkness. You are ours." But I would not relent. With an iron grip on hope, I felt the light pulsating within, desperately striving to break free, to engulf us both in its warmth. Just as it looked like the darkness would overtake us, I felt an incredible surge of energy, a wave of determination that blazed through me. It was as if the very essence of hope had ignited beyond anything I had known. I closed my eyes and channeled every part of my being into that light, letting it swell until it burst forth like the dawn after the longest night. I could feel it coursing through me, intertwined with our own resolve, the strength we shared igniting an inferno that began to push back against the encroaching shadows. With a primal scream, I thrust my hands forward, sending a torrent of radiant energy crashing against the waves of darkness. The air sizzled around me as the two forces collided violently, flashes of blinding light clashing with the swirling void. I could hear the tortured shrieks of the shadows as my light surrounded them, burning fiercely, forcing them back into the recesses from which they came. I felt free, almost invincible in that moment, as the warmth enveloped us entirely, filling the air with a cacophony of hope. But just as victory seemed within our grasp, the depths of the chasm erupted. Tendrils of shadow lashed out like serpents, reaching for me with frantic desperation. The ground shook violently, and I stumbled, nearly losing my footing. The figure I had seen before shifted in the depths, its formless body swirling in rage, now emboldened by the resistance we had shown. Its void-like mouth opened wide, and I could feel its cold breath sweeping over me, a chilling reminder of all I had fought against. "Foolish child," it hissed, voice dripping with malice. "You think you can banish me? I am the darkness you fear within yourself." The shadows surged forward, wrapping tight around my limbs, squeezing relentlessly as I fought to regain my footing. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, fearing the creature's words might indeed hold truth. As I struggled, I could feel her presence slipping, that spark of light dimming in the face of overwhelming despair. "Don't let go," I pleaded, exerting every ounce of strength to pull her back to the light, remembering why we were fighting. "We're not alone. We'll face this together." Just as I felt her warmth begin to fade, she threw her head back and shouted, "I won't let you win." It was loud and fierce, her voice slicing through the chaos like a blade. Strength surged from her, combining with mine, forming a luminous shield that pushed back against the shadows that threatened to swallow us whole. In that moment, the ground split again, a cry of anguish echoing from the chasm, and I saw the faces of my fears swirling within the dark, a parade of regrets, heartbreak, and despair, looking up at me with animalistic hunger. It was horrifying and paralyzing, and the sound of their wailing filled my ears, drowning out the light. "Embrace us," they screamed, their voices a twisted chorus. "You cannot escape." I gritted my teeth and held tighter onto her hand. "We are our fears," I shouted, "but we are also hope. We choose to fight." The burst of defiance pushed the shadows back, and I harnessed that feeling, allowing it to thrash against the darkness until it began to crack under the pressure. The cries of anguish transformed into shrieks of rage as the shadows writhed, swirling in a storm of fury that felt suffocating. White-hot light blazed around us, igniting the air, illuminating the grotesque forms that threatened to engulf us. With a final surge, I released everything, my doubts, my pain, and all my fears, summoning them up for one last battle. My voice roared above the cacophony. "You do not own me," as I thrust my hands forward one last time. The very fabric of the dark realm began to unravel. The light pierced through the darkness, creating a barrier that shattered the shadows into fragments, scattering them into the void. I braced myself, eyes squeezed shut against the brilliance, feeling the warmth wrap around us as the shadows dissolved into mist, leaving only echoes of their sinister whispers. In the aftermath, a silence fell over the clearing, thick like fog, suffocating and heavy, but void of the previous dread. I opened my eyes, panting, and looked around. The chasm had retreated, and what remained was a clearing bathed in soft light, flickering like the stars above. Turning to her, I saw the remnants of fear and doubt begin to wash away in the glow, replaced by fierce strength. We stood there together, hearts racing, still trembling from what had just occurred. I felt exhausted but alive, every part of me fading slowly, like embers cooling after a fierce blaze. "We did it," I whispered, barely believing it. "We fought the darkness. But the moment was fleeting, as I realized something was still not right. The air had shifted. The peace felt too fragile, too ephemeral. Before I could voice my concern, a cold wind gusted through the trees, stirring the shadows that clung to the edges of the clearing. A deep rumbling echoed from deep below, a promise that the darkness was not truly defeated. It was a warning, a reminder that fear, though faced, never truly leaves. It lurks just beneath the surface, always waiting for a moment of weakness to creep back in. "Let's get out of here," she said, her voice shaking slightly, urging me away as she pulled me back towards the path we had come. Each step felt weighted, but I nodded, knowing we had to keep moving forward and not look back. As we fled from the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows would return, that they were merely biding their time. The darkness had not been vanquished. It merely retreated into the recesses of our minds, waiting for another opportunity to ensnare us in its grasp. And so we ran, hearts pounding, breathing in the light around us, bearing the weight of the truth that we would continue to fight together. The journey would never truly end, as the darkness would always linger just beyond. But as long as I had that light within me, as long as I held on to her and the bond we shared, I would remain unyielding. The shadows may always seek to reclaim us, but we are the children of light, and we would continue to shine.